Ma'am, this entire structure could kill you. Natalie Whitaker's $1.2 million Portland home was supposed to represent success, until the morning her back deck tried to swallow her alive. One rotted board, one near-death plunge, and suddenly the high-powered patent attorney who argued before federal judges couldn't find a single contractor willing to save her. Except one. Darius Cole arrived with 5-star reviews and calloused hands, quoting half the market rate for a job that would take weeks. Alone. In her house. With access to everything. The neighborhood started whispering before he even finished day one. What Natalie didn't know. Hiring him would cost her everything she'd built. And give her everything she'd been missing. Follow this story to the very end and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this journey travels. Natalie Whitaker heard the crack before she felt the drop. One moment, she was standing on her back deck with a coffee mug in one hand and her phone in the other, mentally rehearsing her opening argument for the Bergman patent case. The next moment, the world tilted violently sideways as the board beneath her right heel splintered with a sound like a gunshot. Her coffee launched into the air, her phone clattered against the railing, and Natalie's entire body pitched forward toward the 12-foot drop to the stone patio below. Her left hand shot out on pure instinct, fingers closing around the deck railing with enough force to send pain screaming up her forearm. She hung there, suspended, one foot dangling over nothing, the other still perched on a board that groaned ominously under her weight. Below her, the coffee mug shattered against stone, the sound sharp and final. "Jesus Christ," she gasped, hauling herself back onto solid decking with shaking arms. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely grip the railing. When she finally stood upright and looked down, she saw the jagged hole where her foot had been, and beneath it, more rot than wood. The beam looked like it had been chewed by something with teeth. Natalie backed away from the edge, not trusting another single board. She didn't stop until she was inside her kitchen with the sliding glass door firmly closed between her and the deck that had just tried to kill her. She stood there for a full minute, breathing hard, staring at the deck through the glass like it might lunge at her. This was insane. This entire situation was insane. She'd bought this house 18 months ago. A meticulously maintained 1920s Craftsman in Portland's Alameda neighborhood, professionally inspected, appraised at $1.2 million, with original hardwood floors and enough period details to make her mother's garden club friends weep with envy. The inspector had noted minor exterior wear consistent with age and recommended routine maintenance within 2 years. He hadn't mentioned that the back deck was a death trap held together by hope and denial. Natalie grabbed her phone from where it had landed near the sink, miraculously uncracked, and pulled up her contacts. Morrison & Sons Construction. She'd used them for the bathroom remodel last spring. They'd been expensive but professional, and right now she'd happily pay double for someone who could make this nightmare go away. The phone rang 4 times before a recorded message picked up. "You've reached Morrison & Sons. We're currently booking projects for September 2025. Please leave a detailed message and we'll return your call within 3 business days." September. It was March. Natalie hung up without leaving a message. She tried Cascade Builders next, then Heritage Restoration, then PDX Pro Construction. By the 6th call, she'd stopped being polite. By the 8th, she'd stopped pretending this was anything other than a disaster. Every single contractor in Portland was either booked solid for months, not returning calls, or quoting time frames that might as well have been geological eras. "We could potentially fit you in for an estimate in July," the woman from Craftsman Collective said, her tone suggesting she was doing Natalie an enormous favor. "But with material delays and permitting, you're realistically looking at a fall start date. Maybe October if we're lucky." "I have a hole in my deck," Natalie said, keeping her voice level through sheer force of will. "An actual hole. That I almost fell through this morning." "That does sound urgent." The woman's sympathy was professional and entirely useless. "In the meantime, I'd recommend cordoning off the affected area with caution tape and avoiding use of the structure entirely." Natalie thanked her and hung up. She looked at the deck again. Caution tape. 6 months. She had a backyard dinner party scheduled for next month. Colleagues, potential clients, the kind of networking event that actually mattered in her field. She had a house that was supposed to represent stability, success, the fact that she'd made it. Instead, she had rotting wood and a timeline that stretched into autumn. She opened her laptop and started searching. Portland contractors. Emergency deck repair. Same-day service. The results were the same companies she'd already called, plus a scattered collection of handyman services with 2-star reviews and websites that looked like they'd been built during the Clinton administration. Then, buried on page 3 of the search results, she found it. Cole Home Solutions. 5 stars across 43 reviews. Solo operation, licensed and insured, specializing in structural repairs, deck restoration, and emergency services. The photo showed a black man in his late 30s, wearing a work shirt and a slight smile that suggested competence without arrogance. The quote at the top of the page read, "Quality work at honest prices. No project too small, no timeline too tight." Natalie clicked through to the reviews. They were almost suspiciously positive, except they all had details that felt real. Dates, descriptions, photos of before and after work. One woman had written, "Darius rebuilt my entire front porch in 4 days while I was at work. Came home every evening to progress, never a mess, always locked up tight. Felt safer having him around than most people I actually know." She checked the license number, current. She checked the insurance, active. She looked at the pricing estimates listed for similar projects, roughly half what Morrison & Sons had quoted for her bathroom. Half. Either this guy was incompetent, or he was the only honest contractor in Portland. Natalie called before she could talk herself out of it. "Cole Home Solutions, this is Darius." His voice was deep, warm, and blessedly real. No receptionist, no phone tree, just a human being who answered on the second ring. "Hi, my name is Natalie Whitaker. I have a deck emergency and everyone else in Portland is booked until the apocalypse. Are you available for an estimate?" "Deck emergency," Darius repeated, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "That's a new one. What kind of emergency are we talking?" "The kind where I almost fell through my deck this morning because apparently the whole structure is held together by wishful thinking and termite dust." "Ouch. Yeah, that qualifies." She heard rustling, like he was checking a schedule. "I can swing by this afternoon if that works. Around 2?" Natalie almost laughed. She'd been calling people all morning, and the best offer she'd gotten was a maybe estimate in 4 months. 2 o'clock today would be perfect. The address is, just text it to this number. I'll see you at 2, Ms. Whitaker. "Natalie," she said, "please." "Natalie," he agreed. "See you soon." He hung up before she could second-guess herself. Natalie stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, feeling like she'd just made either the smartest or stupidest decision of her week, possibly her year. She texted him the address. Then she called her paralegal and pushed her afternoon meetings to video. Then she did what any reasonable person would do when a stranger was about to show up at their house. She Googled him. Darius Cole, 38, Portland native, licensed contractor for 12 years. Before that, and this was where it got interesting, he'd worked for a major construction firm as a project manager, the kind of corporate job that came with benefits and a 401k. Then he'd left and started his own solo operation. No explanation in any of the articles she found, just a clean break from corporate to independent. His social media was sparse, mostly project photos, a few shots of a Craftsman-style house she assumed was his own. Nothing personal. No politics, no controversy, just work. Good work. The kind of detailed finished carpentry that made Natalie's own deck look like it had been assembled by raccoons with power tools. At 1:55 p.m., a white work truck pulled up in front of her house. Natalie watched from the window as Darius Cole climbed out, grabbed a toolbox and a tablet, and walked up her front path like he'd done it 1,000 times. He was taller than she'd expected from the website photo, probably 6'2", with the kind of build that came from actually using his body for work, instead of pretending to at an overpriced gym. He wore jeans, work boots, and a navy t-shirt with Cole Home Solutions printed across the chest. She opened the door before he could knock. "Natalie?" He had an easy smile, the kind that probably put nervous clients at ease. "Darius Cole, thanks for having me out. Thanks for coming on short notice." She stepped back to let him in, suddenly hyper-aware of how pristine her house looked. The kind of showroom-perfect interior that screamed, "I hired a designer and followed every instruction." Darius didn't seem to notice. He was already looking around with the practical assessment of someone who saw houses as systems, not statements. "So," he said, setting his toolbox down in the entryway, "show me this deck that tried to murder you." Natalie led him through the kitchen to the sliding glass door. "I was standing right there," she said, pointing to the hole. The board just gave way. No warning, no creaking, just snap. Darius stepped carefully onto the deck, testing each board before putting his full weight down. He knelt beside the hole, pulled a flashlight from his belt, and shone it into the gap. His expression shifted from neutral to serious in about 3 seconds. "Ma'am, this entire structure could kill you," he said quietly. "I got that impression when I almost fell through it." "No, I mean—" He stood up, moved to the railing, and gripped it with both hands. It shifted. Not much, maybe an inch, but enough. "This isn't one bad board. This is systemic failure. Your joists are rotted, your support posts are compromised, and I'd bet money your ledger board is separating from the house." He looked at her, his expression serious. "If you'd hit this railing instead of catching it, you'd be in a hospital right now. Maybe worse." Natalie felt something cold settle in her stomach. The inspector said minor wear. The inspector was blind, bought, or incompetent. Darius moved around the deck like he was investigating a crime scene, testing boards, checking connections, occasionally making notes on his tablet. "This is 20-plus years of deferred maintenance. Someone painted over the rot instead of fixing it. Probably multiple someones. Can it be repaired?" He was quiet for a long moment, still examining the structure. Then he straightened up and met her eyes. "Honestly, no. This needs to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. Anything else is just expensive Band-Aids on a corpse." "How expensive are we talking?" "For a deck this size, properly done, with treated lumber, proper flashing, up to current code." He glanced at his tablet, did some quick math. "Most companies would quote you between $25,000 and $35,000. That's materials, labor, permits, inspection fees." Natalie's chest tightened. She'd just spent $60,000 on the bathroom remodel. Her savings account was healthy, but not infinite, and spring was supposed to be landscaping season. New furniture, the kind of finishing touches that turned a house into a home. "And your quote?" $15,000, Darius said. "I work solo, keep my overhead low, buy materials direct. I can start next week and have it done in 3 weeks, weather permitting." It was half, exactly half. Natalie stared at him, trying to figure out the catch. "Why is your pricing so much lower?" "Because I don't have a receptionist, a showroom, or a marketing budget. I don't pay sales guys commission. I do the work myself. I do it right, and I charge what's fair instead of what the market will bear." He held her gaze steady. "Look, I get it. You're thinking this sounds too good to be true. That's smart. Do your homework, check my references, call the licensing board. I'll wait." "I already did," Natalie admitted. "Your reviews are almost suspiciously perfect." He laughed at that, a genuine sound. "Yeah, I get that a lot. Here's my secret. I show up, I do what I say I'm going to do, and I don't treat people like walking wallets. Turns out that's rare enough to seem suspicious." Natalie looked at the deck, then back at Darius. 3 weeks. 15,000. Problem solved before her dinner party, before summer, before the entire structure collapsed into her backyard. Every instinct she'd honed in 12 years of legal practice was screaming at her to get multiple bids, check references again, slow down and think. But she'd already called everyone else, and they'd all said no. "When can you start?" she asked. "Monday," Darius said immediately. "I'll need a deposit, 5,000, to order materials and pull permits. I work 8 to 4 most days, clean up every evening, and I'll text you photos of the progress. You'll have my cell, my email, and a written contract that spells out exactly what I'm doing and when." "You work alone?" "Just me. I used to run crews. Had a whole project management career before this. But I like working solo. More control over quality, fewer scheduling headaches, and clients don't have strangers cycling through their house." That was the part that made Natalie hesitate. Not the price, not the timeline. The fact that she'd be handing her house keys to a man she'd met 20 minutes ago. A man who'd have access to her home while she was at the office, who'd know her schedule, her security code, where she kept her valuables. Darius seemed to read her face. "Here's what I can tell you," he said quietly. "I've been doing this 12 years, solo for 8. Never had a complaint, never had an incident, never had a client who regretted hiring me. I'm bonded, insured, and background checked. But more than that, I'm not here to make you uncomfortable. If you want to meet my previous clients, I can set that up. If you want to be home while I work, we can adjust the schedule. If you want security cameras pointed at the deck, I'll wave at them every morning." He said it without defensiveness, like he'd given this speech before and knew exactly why. Natalie felt something twist in her chest, part embarrassment, part recognition of what they were really talking about. "I appreciate that," she said carefully. "I'll have my attorney draft a contract. If everything looks good, we can start Monday." "Fair enough." Darius handed her a business card. "That's got my cell, email, and license number. I'll send you references tonight, past clients who said I could share their contact info. Call them. Ask them anything." They shook hands in her driveway. His grip was firm, professional, and gone before it could become awkward. Natalie watched him drive away, then went inside and immediately called her attorney. "I need a contractor agreement," she told Brian Porter, who'd handled her house closing and every legal document since. "Standard liability protection, payment schedule, termination clause. Can you have something by end of day?" "Sure," Brian said. "What's the job?" "Deck rebuild, 15,000, 3-week timeline." "Who's the contractor?" "Cole Home Solutions. One-man operation, licensed and insured." There was a pause. "Natalie, did you get multiple bids?" "Everyone else is booked until fall." "And this guy can start Monday?" Brian's tone shifted into what Natalie privately called his "lawyer is worried" voice. "That seems... His reviews are solid. I'm checking references tonight. And you're drafting a contract that protects me." "Okay," Brian said, drawing the word out. "Just be careful, all right? Solo operators can be great, or they can be disasters. There's not much middle ground." "I'll be careful," Natalie promised. She hung up and opened her email. 3 messages were already waiting from Darius. The contract he used as a standard template, a detailed project timeline with photos of similar work, and a list of 5 references with phone numbers and addresses. Natalie started calling. The first woman, Patricia Chen, picked up on the second ring. "Oh my God, Darius Cole? Hire him immediately. He rebuilt my entire back deck last summer, came in under budget, finished early, and the work is gorgeous. I trust him completely." The second reference, James Whitmore, was equally enthusiastic. "Darius saved my house. I had water damage in my basement, and every contractor I called wanted to gut the whole thing. Darius identified the actual problem, failing exterior grading, fixed it properly, and charged me 1/3 of what everyone else quoted. I've sent him probably 10 referrals since then." By the time Natalie finished the 5th call, her skepticism had shifted into something closer to relief. Every single person said the same things: professional, trustworthy, high-quality work, honest pricing. One woman had even left him alone in her house for 2 weeks while she was traveling, and came home to a finished bathroom renovation and a handwritten note thanking her for the opportunity. That night, Natalie sat at her kitchen table with Brian's contract on one side and Darius's project proposal on the other. The numbers matched. The timeline was clear. The scope of work was detailed enough to make her patent attorney brain happy. She signed the contract, wrote a check for $5,000, and emailed everything to Darius at 11 p.m. His response came through at 11:04. "Contract received and signed. Materials ordered. See you Monday at 8 a.m. Thanks for trusting me with your home." Natalie closed her laptop and looked at the deck through her kitchen window. In 3 weeks, it would be new, safe, fixed. She just had to trust a stranger with her house, her safety, and access to everything she owned. What could possibly go wrong? Monday morning arrived with the kind of relentless sunshine that made Portland feel like it was apologizing for winter. Natalie was awake at 6, showered and dressed by 7, and standing in her kitchen with her 3rd coffee by 7:45, pretending she wasn't waiting for Darius to show up. At exactly 8 a.m., his truck pulled into her driveway. She watched from the window as he unloaded sawhorses, tool bags, and what looked like enough equipment to build an entire house. He worked with efficient precision, no wasted movement, setting up his workspace like he'd done it 1,000 times. Then he walked to her front door and knocked. "Morning," he said when she opened it. "Ready to make some noise?" "Ready as I'll ever be." Natalie handed him a spare key. "This is for the back gate and the side door. I'll be at the office until about 5, but my cell's on if you need anything." Darius took the key and held it up like he was making a promise. "I'll lock up every time I leave, even for lunch. Gate, doors, everything. And I'll text you photos of the progress." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "I know this is probably awkward, but I've never had someone working on my house when I'm not here. So if I'm a little neurotic about check-ins—" "You're not neurotic," Darius said easily. "You're trusting a stranger with your home. That's a big deal. I'd be weirded out if you weren't careful." Something in Natalie's chest loosened. "Okay, good. I'll try not to be annoying about it." "You won't be." He smiled. "Go to work. I've got this." She left feeling only slightly insane. By the time she reached her office downtown, her phone had already buzzed with the first update. A photo of the deck with neon caution tape cordoning off the entire structure, and a caption that read, "Step 1. Make sure nobody dies. Demolition starts after coffee." Natalie found herself smiling at her desk. Her paralegal Monica noticed immediately. "What's got you grinning? Did we win something?" "My deck didn't kill me. I found a contractor who can actually start this decade, and he's already at my house tearing apart the death trap." Natalie set her phone down. "Small victories." "Who'd you hire?" "Guy named Darius Cole. Solo operation. Great reviews. Very professional." Monica's expression flickered with something Natalie couldn't quite read. "He working alone? In your house?" "He's working on my deck, outside." Still, Monica leaned against the doorframe, her tone carefully casual. "You might want to be home for some of it, just in case." Natalie's good mood evaporated. "Just in case what?" "I'm just saying, you don't really know this guy, and you're giving him access to your whole property." Monica shrugged. "Better safe than sorry. He's licensed, insured, and has 43 five-star reviews. What exactly are you suggesting I should be worried about?" "Nothing specific," Monica said quickly. "Just, general caution." She left before Natalie could push back. Natalie sat at her desk, staring at her phone, feeling the ugly weight of what Monica hadn't quite said out loud settling in her stomach. Her phone buzzed. Another photo from Darius, the deck half demolished, rot visible in nearly every board, and a caption that read, "This was a lawsuit waiting to happen. Good call getting it handled." Natalie texted back, "That bad?" His response was immediate. "Worse. Someone should lose their license over this inspection. But don't worry, 3 weeks and you'll have the safest deck in Portland." She believed him, and she hated that Monica had just planted doubt where none had existed. That evening, Natalie came home to find her backyard transformed. The old deck was completely gone, hauled away, leaving only the support posts and exposed joists. The workspace was meticulously organized, tools on tarps, materials stacked neatly, sawdust swept into piles. And on her back door, there was a handwritten note on professional letterhead, Day 1, complete demo and rot assessment. Found additional damage to ledger board. Needs replacement before rebuild. Added materials ordered, no cost increase. See attached photos for documentation. Back tomorrow at 8. Darius attached to the note were printed photos showing the damaged ledger board from 3 different angles, with measurements and notes written in clean, precise handwriting. Natalie stood in her kitchen, holding the note, feeling something she hadn't expected. Relief. Real, genuine relief. This was someone who knew what he was doing, someone who cared about getting it right. She texted him, "Thank you for the detailed update. See you tomorrow." His response came 10 minutes later. "No problem. Sleep well. Your deck won't attack you tonight." Natalie laughed out loud in her empty kitchen. The next morning, she woke up to another text. "Morning. Starting foundation work today. Gonna be loud. Sorry in advance." She texted back, "Do what you need to do. I'll suffer through." When she got home that evening, the foundation work was done. New support posts, reinforced connections, everything level and square. Another note waited on her door, this time with a small hand-drawn diagram showing the new support structure and why it was stronger than the original. This became the pattern. Every morning, Darius texted her before starting work. Every evening, she came home to progress, detailed notes, and a workspace cleaner than most people's garages. He never missed a day, never showed up late, never left anything unlocked or unsecured. By the end of week 1, the frame was complete. By the middle of week 2, the decking boards were going down in perfect parallel lines. And somewhere in that second week, Natalie stopped checking her security cameras obsessively and started actually looking forward to the evening updates. She also started noticing other things, like the way Darius always stored his tools in the garage instead of leaving them exposed to weather, the way he swept not just his workspace but her entire back patio every evening, the way he fixed a loose fence board without being asked and refused payment because it took 30 seconds and I had the screws anyway. On Friday of the second week, Natalie came home early, 2:30 instead of her usual 5, and found Darius on his hands and knees, hand sanding the railing joints with the kind of focused attention most people reserved for fine art. "You know you can use a power sander for that," she called from the doorway. He looked up, startled, then grinned. "Power sander leaves marks. This is going to be perfect when I'm done. It's a deck. It doesn't need to be perfect." "Everything I build needs to be perfect," Darius said simply. "That's the deal I made with myself when I started this business. No shortcuts, no good enough, no compromises. You're paying me for my best work. You're going to get it." Natalie leaned against the doorframe, watching him work. There was something hypnotic about it. The steady rhythm of the sandpaper, the way he checked each joint by touch as much as sight, the complete absorption in the task. This wasn't someone phoning it in. This was craftsmanship, pride, the kind of work ethic her father used to talk about, the kind she'd been taught to respect. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." He didn't stop sanding. "You used to work for a big construction firm, right? Project management?" "Sierra West Construction, 6 years." Now he paused, sitting back on his heels. "Why? Why'd you leave?" "That kind of job. Benefits, stability, upward mobility. Most people would kill for that." Darius was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You ever have a job that paid you well to ignore what you knew was right?" "I'm a lawyer. That's basically the job description." He laughed at that. "Fair. But yeah, I got tired of cutting corners I didn't believe in. Tired of selling clients unnecessary upgrades. Tired of watching crews rush through jobs because corporate wanted faster turnaround. One day I woke up and realized I was helping build things I wouldn't want in my own house." He went back to sanding. "So I left. Took every dime I'd saved, got my own license, and started doing it my way. Haven't regretted it once. Even though you probably make less money, I make enough. And I sleep better." He glanced up at her. "What about you? You ever think about walking away from the corporate thing?" Natalie started to give him her standard answer, the one about loving her work, about intellectual property law being fascinating, about making partner being the goal. But standing in her backyard, watching a man hand sand deck railings at 2:30 on a Friday, the standard answer felt hollow. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't know what I'd walk toward." "That's the hard part," Darius agreed. "Leaving is easy. Knowing where you're going is the trick." They fell into comfortable silence. Darius kept sanding. Natalie went inside to change, but found herself watching through the kitchen window, thinking about choices and compromises and what it meant to build something you could be proud of. Her phone buzzed. A text from her friend, Vanessa. "Drinks tomorrow night? I'm dying to see the house renovations." Natalie texted back, "Deck's almost done. Come by around 6? The response was immediate. "Perfect. I'm bringing wine and judgment. See you then." Natalie smiled, but something about the message felt off. She'd known Vanessa since law school. They'd been friends for over a decade. But lately, Vanessa's judgment felt less like friendly teasing and more like actual criticism. Still, she was excited to show off the deck, excited to prove she'd made a good choice with Darius. Saturday evening arrived warm and clear. Darius had finished the railings that morning and texted her a photo with the caption, "Sealed and gorgeous. Give it 24 hours to cure, and you can host the Queen of England out there." Vanessa showed up at 6:05 with expensive wine and expensive sunglasses, looking like she'd stepped out of a Nordstrom catalog. She air-kissed Natalie's cheek, and swept into the house with practiced confidence. "God, I've missed this place," Vanessa said, setting the wine on the kitchen counter. "Show me this famous deck that almost murdered you." They walked out back together. The deck was stunning, smooth, level, solid, with railings that practically glowed in the evening light. Darius had even added built-in planters at the corners, a detail that hadn't been in the original plan. "Holy shit," Vanessa said, and for once she sounded genuinely impressed. "This is gorgeous. Who did you hire?" "Guy named Darius Cole. He's been incredible. Under budget, ahead of schedule, and the work is flawless." Darius," Vanessa repeated slowly. "Is he local?" "Portland native. Why?" Vanessa's expression shifted into something Natalie couldn't quite read. "No reason. It's just, this is really high-end work. I'm surprised someone that good isn't booked solid." "He works solo, keeps his overhead low." "Smart." Vanessa ran her hand along the railing, testing it. "Does he work alone? Like, actually alone? In your house?" There it was. The same careful tone Monica had used, the same implied question underneath the polite words. "He works on my deck," Natalie said, keeping her voice level. "Outside, during business hours. And yes, he's here alone because he's a professional contractor doing his job." "I'm just asking," Vanessa said quickly. "It's a big house. You're not home. I'd be paranoid too." "I'm not paranoid. I checked his references. He's licensed and insured. He's been nothing but professional." "Of course he has." Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure he's perfectly lovely. It's just, you can never be too careful these days." Natalie felt heat rising in her chest. "Careful about what exactly?" "Nothing specific. Just general safety. You're a single woman living alone. It's smart to be cautious about who you let into your space." "He's not in my space. He's building my deck." "Right. Of course." Vanessa turned back toward the house. "Should we open that wine?" They drank on the new deck, talking about work and mutual friends and everything except what Vanessa had just implied. But Natalie couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that her friend, her supposed friend, had just looked at her beautiful new deck and seen a problem that didn't exist. When Vanessa left an hour later, Natalie stood on her deck alone, watching the sun set over Portland, feeling angry and sad and confused all at once. Her phone buzzed. A text from Darius. "Stopping by tomorrow afternoon to install the final step risers. Should be done by 3. Let me know if you need me to reschedule." She texted back, "Tomorrow's perfect. Thank you." His response came a minute later. "My pleasure. This one turned out really nice. You should be proud." Natalie looked at the deck, at the clean lines, the perfect joints, the craftsmanship that spoke to care and skill and integrity. She was proud. Proud of choosing someone who did excellent work, proud of trusting her instincts, proud of having the kind of home where people could gather safely. She just wished everyone else could see what she saw. Sunday afternoon came with the kind of quiet that made Natalie's house feel too empty. She'd spent the morning answering emails, reviewing case files, doing all the productive things successful attorneys were supposed to do on weekends. But her mind kept drifting back to Vanessa's careful questions, Monica's implied warnings, the way both women had looked at her like she was making a mistake she was too naive to recognize. At 2:45, Darius's truck pulled into the driveway. Natalie watched from the kitchen window as he unloaded a toolbox and several pre-cut boards, moving with the same efficient precision she'd come to expect. He was wearing a different t-shirt today, plain gray instead of the company logo. And for some reason that felt more personal, more real. Like she was seeing the actual person instead of the professional contractor. She opened the back door before he could knock. "You're early." Traffic was light. He held up the boards. "Final step risers. Should take maybe an hour, then you're officially done. Come on back." She stepped aside to let him through. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be great, thanks." He headed out to the deck while Natalie filled a glass from her kitchen filter, taking longer than necessary because she was suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been for the past 2 weeks. This was the last day. After today, Darius would be gone. His truck would stop showing up every morning, and her house would go back to being just hers. She brought him the water and found him already working, measuring twice before making a single cut. He looked up when she approached, accepted the glass with a grateful nod, and drank half of it in one go. "Long morning?" she asked. "Started at 6 on another project across town. Lady's got a rotted window frame that's letting water into her walls. Easy fix, but she's 83 and kept offering me cookies, so it took longer than planned." He grinned. "Worth it. They were really good cookies." Natalie laughed despite herself. "You're a soft touch." "Guilty." He set the glass down and went back to measuring. "But seriously, this should be quick. I just need to attach these risers, do a final sealant check, and you're good to go." She should have gone back inside, should have left him to work, should have maintained the professional distance that had defined their entire interaction. Instead, she found herself sitting on the back steps, watching him work, feeling the afternoon sun warm on her shoulders. "Can I ask you something?" Natalie said after a few minutes of silence. "Sure." Darius didn't look up from his work. "Do people ever—" She paused, trying to find words that didn't sound accusatory or paranoid. "Do your clients ever treat you differently? Because you work with your hands instead of, I don't know, sitting in an office?" Now he did look up, his expression suddenly guarded. "Why do you ask?" "I had a friend over yesterday. She saw the deck, said it was beautiful, and then spent 20 minutes asking careful questions about whether I felt safe having you here alone." Darius set down his drill very carefully. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you're a professional doing your job, that you've been nothing but trustworthy." Natalie met his eyes. But she kept pushing, like she was waiting for me to admit I'd made a mistake hiring you. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. "This happen a lot? Friends questioning your judgment?" "Only when it comes to you, apparently." The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "My paralegal did the same thing the first day you started. Suggested I should be home, just in case. Neither of them would say what they were worried about, but the implication was pretty clear." "Yeah," Darius said softly. "I bet it was." "Has this happened to you before?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "And Natalie, this happens to me constantly. I show up to give estimates and watch clients lock up their valuables while I'm standing right there. I work in people's yards and neighbors call to check on the homeowner. I had a woman follow me around her house with her phone out, recording everything, because she wanted documentation in case something went missing." He picked up the drill again, his movements precise but tense. "Last year, I did a kitchen renovation for a couple in Lake Oswego. Beautiful people, progressive bumper stickers, the whole package. They asked if I minded if they installed temporary security cameras for the insurance. I said fine. Later found out from their neighbor that they didn't have any other contractors on camera, just me." Natalie felt something sick settle in her stomach. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize. You didn't do it." He lined up the next riser, checked it twice, and started drilling with more force than strictly necessary. "Look, I knew what I was signing up for when I started this business. I knew that working solo meant people would have questions. Some of those questions are legitimate. I am a stranger in their homes. But some of them—" He stopped, took a breath. "Some of them aren't about me being a stranger. They're about me being a black man in a space where people don't expect to see me. That's not fair." "No, it's not." He finished securing the riser and moved to the next one. "But it's reality, and mostly I just deal with it. I do perfect work. I keep everything documented. I give people zero reasons to doubt me. Eventually, most clients relax. Some don't. The ones who don't, I finish the job, take their money, and never work for them again." Natalie watched him work, thinking about all the things she'd taken for granted. The way contractors had shown up at her house for years, and she'd never once questioned their presence. The way she'd had painters, electricians, plumbers cycling through her home, and it never occurred to her to worry. The privilege of assuming competence instead of threat. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I never doubted you. Not for a second." Darius glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. "I know. That's why I'm telling you this instead of just finishing the job and leaving. You asked an honest question. You deserve an honest answer. I hate that this is something you have to deal with." "Yeah, well..." He attached the final riser and stood back to examine his work. "It's not your burden to carry. You've been a great client. Best I've had in months, actually. You trusted me, you paid on time. You didn't hover or micromanage or treat me like I was going to rob you blind. That matters more than you know." Something in his tone made Natalie's chest tighten. What happens with the clients who don't trust you? Depends. Some people are just nervous by nature. They warm up eventually. Some people hired me because I was cheap and they resent that they couldn't afford someone else. Those are the ones who watch me like hawks and complain about every little thing. He picked up his drill and toolbox, packing up with practiced efficiency. And then there are the ones who hired me specifically because I'm black, because it makes them feel progressive, and they treat me like a charity case instead of a professional. Those are almost worse. Jesus. It's fine. Like I said, I finish the job, I cash the check, I move on. He picked up the empty water glass and handed it to her. Your deck is done. Final walkthrough? They circled the deck together while Darius pointed out details. The drainage slope, the reinforced corners, the way he'd sealed every joint to prevent water damage. He'd even treated the underside of the deck with weatherproofing that wasn't in the original contract. You didn't have to do that, Natalie said, kneeling to look at the underside where the wood gleamed with fresh sealant. I know, but it'll add 10 years to the life of the deck. Seemed worth the extra hour. He straightened up, hands in his pockets. So, what do you think? Meet expectations? Exceeded them. Natalie stood, brushing off her knees. This is incredible work, Darius. Seriously, I'm going to recommend you to everyone I know. I appreciate that. He pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. Final payment is $10,000. You can Venmo, check, whatever works for you. Natalie had the check already written, had been carrying it in her pocket all afternoon. She handed it to him now, and he folded it once without looking at the amount, tucking it into his wallet with the casual confidence of someone who trusted what he'd earned. That's it then, he said. You've got my number if anything comes up, but this should be solid for decades. Enjoy your deck? He was halfway to his truck when Natalie called after him. Wait. Darius turned, his expression curious but guarded. Yeah? She should have just thanked him again, should have shaken his hand, said goodbye, and let him leave. Instead, she heard herself say, My firm is hosting a networking event here in 3 weeks, garden party thing, very casual. If you wanted to come, hand out business cards, meet potential clients, I think you'd do well. These are people with money and houses that need work. He studied her for a long moment, and Natalie couldn't read his expression. That's generous of you. It's strategic. I need a contractor I can trust. You need clients who won't treat you like a criminal. Seems like a win-win. Natalie. He said her name carefully, like he was picking his way through a minefield. I appreciate the offer. I really do. But you should think about what you're actually suggesting. You invite me to a party full of lawyers and doctors and whatever else, someone's going to ask who I am. When you say my contractor, they're going to look at me different than they look at you. Some of them are going to have the same questions your friend had, and you're going to be the one who has to answer them. I can handle that. I'm sure you can. But can you handle your friends deciding you're naive or reckless or... He stopped himself, jaw tight. Can you handle them looking at you differently because you don't see me the way they think you should? The question hit harder than Natalie expected, because he was right. She could already imagine the conversations, Monica pulling her aside with concerned looks, Vanessa making careful suggestions about maintaining professional boundaries, colleagues questioning her judgment in ways that would never happen if Darius were white. I don't care what they think, she said. Yes, you do, and you should. These are your people, your network. I'm not going to be the reason you damage relationships that matter to your career. So what? You just accept that some clients are going to treat you like garbage? That you can't go to networking events because people are racist? I accept that I'm not going to change the world by showing up at garden parties. His voice was gentle but firm. I built you a deck. I did it well. I charged you fairly. And now I'm moving on to the next project. That's how this works. Natalie wanted to argue, wanted to push back against the resignation in his voice, against the idea that this was just how things were and nothing would change. But standing in her driveway, watching Darius prepare to drive away, she realized she didn't actually know how to fight this battle. She'd never had to. The offer stands, she said quietly, if you change your mind. I won't, but thank you. He climbed into his truck, then paused with the door open. For what it's worth, you're one of the good ones. Don't let your friends make you doubt that. He drove away before she could respond. Natalie stood in her driveway long after the truck disappeared, feeling like she'd just failed a test she hadn't known she was taking. That evening, she sat on her new deck with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over Portland's West Hills. The deck was perfect, solid and beautiful, and exactly what she'd wanted. But all she could think about was the way Darius had looked when he talked about being recorded, being watched, being treated like a threat instead of a professional. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Dinner next Sunday? Your father wants to see the house." Natalie texted back, "Sure, 6 p.m. Perfect. Should I bring anything? Just yourselves." She almost added that she'd finally finished the deck renovation, that the house was ready to show off. But something stopped her. Some instinct that her parents would ask questions she didn't want to answer. Questions about who did the work, and how much it cost, and whether she'd been careful. Questions that would sound reasonable, but feel like judgment. Monday morning arrived with rain, the kind of steady Pacific Northwest drizzle that made everything look gray. Natalie dressed for court, checked her reflection twice, and headed downtown to argue a motion in a patent dispute that should have felt important, but mostly felt exhausting. She won. The judge ruled in her favor, the client was thrilled, and Monica took her to lunch to celebrate. They sat in a downtown bistro that served $15 salads and pretended to be worth it, and Monica spent 20 minutes talking about her weekend before finally saying, "So, is your deck guy finished?" "Yesterday," Natalie said, stabbing a piece of overpriced arugula. "It looks amazing." "Good. I'm glad that whole situation worked out." "What situation? Hiring a contractor?" Monica's expression flickered. "You know what I mean. Having someone you don't know around your house. It's always a risk." "It wasn't a risk. It was a business transaction. He did excellent work and behaved completely professionally." "I'm sure he did." Monica sipped her water. "I'm just saying, you got lucky. Could have gone differently." Natalie set down her fork with more force than necessary. "Monica, what exactly do you think could have gone differently? Be specific." "I don't know. Theft? Damage? Just anything. You hear stories." "What stories? Tell me one specific story about a licensed contractor with perfect reviews who turned out to be dangerous." Monica looked uncomfortable. "I'm not saying he's dangerous. I'm saying you took a risk that I wouldn't have taken." "Because he's black." The words landed like a slap. Monica's face went red. "That is not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying?" "Because I've hired contractors before. White guys with mediocre reviews who showed up late and charged double, and you never once suggested I was taking a risk. But the one time I hire someone who's actually competent, suddenly everyone's worried about my safety." "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Natalie pushed her salad away, appetite gone. "Darius Cole has a spotless record, 12 years of experience, and 43 five-star reviews. He was professional, trustworthy, and did better work than anyone else I've ever hired. But you treated him like a threat the moment I mentioned his name." "I was trying to look out for you." "By assuming the worst about someone you've never met?" "That's not looking out for me. That's prejudice dressed up as concern." Monica stood up, her face tight. "I'm going back to the office. We can talk when you're less defensive." "I'm not defensive. I'm angry. There's a difference." Monica left without paying for her half of lunch. Natalie sat alone in the bistro, surrounded by lawyers and executives having civilized conversations about civilized things, feeling like she'd just burned a bridge she couldn't rebuild. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hi, Natalie. This is Patricia Chen. We spoke when you were checking Darius's references. I hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to reach out. Darius mentioned you might be hosting a networking event. If you need any help organizing or want to connect with other clients who've worked with him, let me know. He's changed a lot of lives, mine included. Would love to pay that forward." Natalie stared at the message, feeling something shift in her chest. She texted back, "Not weird at all. I'd love to talk. Are you free this week?" The response came immediately. "Coffee Thursday? There's a place in Hawthorne I love." They met at a small cafe that smelled like fresh bread and possibility. Patricia was in her 50s, elegant and warm, with the kind of smile that made strangers feel like friends. She ordered them both lattes and got straight to the point. "So Darius mentioned you had some questions about how people react to his work," Patricia said, her tone gentle but knowing. That obvious? He called me last night, said he'd just finished your deck and wanted to check in because he thought you might be dealing with some pushback from your social circle. She sipped her latte. Was he right? Natalie nodded, suddenly grateful to be talking to someone who understood. My friends keep acting like I did something reckless, like hiring him was dangerous. Because he's black. They won't say that, but yes. They never do, Patricia said. I went through the same thing when Darius rebuilt my deck. My sister actually asked if I was comfortable having him around my children, like he was some kind of predator instead of a contractor doing his job. She shook her head. I told her if she ever implied something like that again, she could find a new place to stay when she visited Portland. What did she say? She apologized, sort of, but the damage was done. I realized my sister, this woman I'd loved my whole life, had beliefs I couldn't respect. It changed our relationship. Natalie felt that truth settle in her bones. I just had a fight with my paralegal. She kept insisting she was looking out for me, but really she was just revealing how she sees the world. And it's ugly. Yeah, Patricia said softly. It is. But here's what I've learned. When people show you who they are, believe them. Your paralegal showed you that she sees black men as threats by default. Your friend showed you that they value their comfort over your judgment. Now you get to decide what you do with that information. What did you do? Patricia smiled. I started referring Darius to every single person I knew, my neighbors, my book club, my cousin who needed bathroom work. I made it my mission to help him build his business because I'd seen how good his work was and how badly he deserved clients who treated him with respect. She leaned forward, but I also stopped pretending that people who questioned my judgment were just being cautious. I started calling it what it was, prejudice, and I stopped making excuses for them. That must have been lonely. It was. But you know what was lonelier? Pretending I didn't see what I saw, letting people make racist assumptions and staying quiet because speaking up was uncomfortable. She finished her latte. You don't have to burn down your whole life over this, but you do have to decide who you want to be. Someone who stays quiet or someone who speaks up. They talked for another hour. Patricia introduced Natalie to two other women who'd hired Darius. Both had similar stories. Both had faced questions from friends and family. Both had ultimately decided that Darius's competence mattered more than other people's comfort. By the time Natalie left the cafe, she had 3 new phone numbers, a group text thread called Team Darius, and a plan. She spent the next 2 weeks quietly reaching out to everyone in her network, not to convince them, but to test them. She mentioned Darius in casual conversation, watched how people reacted, noted who asked genuine questions versus who made assumptions. The results were depressing. Roughly half her social circle failed the test within 30 seconds. But the other half didn't. The other half asked about his work, requested his contact information, and treated him like the professional he was. Those were the people Natalie invited to her garden party. The event was scheduled for the first Saturday in April, with perfect spring weather and her backyard looking like something from a magazine. Natalie had invited 30 people, colleagues, neighbors, Patricia's referral network, and exactly 3 people from her old social circle who'd passed the test. She'd also invited Darius with a text that said, I'm hosting the party with or without you, but it would mean a lot if you came. No pressure either way. His response came an hour later. What time should I arrive? Saturday arrived warm and clear. Natalie spent the morning setting up, rented tables on the new deck, catered food, wine chilling in tubs of ice. At 2 p.m., guests started arriving. At 2:15, Darius's truck pulled up. He dressed up, khakis and a button-down shirt instead of his usual work clothes, and he carried a box of business cards like armor. Natalie met him at the door, feeling suddenly nervous. You came, she said. You invited me. He glanced past her at the gathering crowd. Should I be worried? Probably, she admitted. But I screened the guest list. Everyone here either already knows your work or wants to. No one who's going to treat you like a charity case or a threat. That must have been a short list. Shorter than I'd like, but better than nothing. She stepped aside. Come on, let me introduce you to some people who need their houses fixed. They walked into the party together. Within 5 minutes, Darius was surrounded by people asking about availability, pricing, and whether he did kitchen renovations. Patricia appeared with her husband and started telling everyone about her deck. A woman named Jennifer showed photos of her crumbling front steps. A lawyer Natalie barely knew asked if Darius could look at his rental property in Selwood. Natalie stood on her deck, watching Darius hand out business cards and answer questions with quiet confidence, and felt something like pride bloom in her chest. This was right. This was what it should look like when competence met opportunity without prejudice getting in the way. "He's impressive," the voice came from behind her. Natalie turned to find David Chen, Patricia's husband, holding a glass of wine and watching Darius with approval. "Patricia told me about the deck, said it was the best work she'd ever seen." "It is," Natalie agreed. "Your wife has good taste." "She does, in contractors and friends." He smiled. "Thanks for doing this. Darius deserves clients who see him clearly. Not enough people do." "I'm learning that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the party flow around them. Then David said, "Patricia mentioned you've been dealing with some pushback from your social circle. How's that going?" "Lost a few friends. Gained some perspective." Natalie sipped her wine. "Turns out I'd rather have a smaller circle of decent people than a large circle of people who make me compromise my values." "That's the hard lesson," David agreed, "but it's the right one." The party lasted until sunset. People left with full stomachs, light hearts, and Darius's contact information saved in their phones. By the time the last guest departed, Natalie's backyard was a mess of empty wine bottles and half-eaten appetizers, but she'd never felt better about a party in her life. Darius helped her clean up without being asked, stacking chairs and collecting trash with the same efficiency he'd brought to building her deck. When the last bottle was in the recycling bin, he turned to her with something close to wonder in his expression. "That was—" He paused, searching for words. "I've been doing this 12 years. I've never had a client do something like that for me." "You've never had a client who got to see how good you are without prejudice getting in the way first." Natalie set down the trash bag she was holding. "I'm not a saint, Darius. I'm just someone who learned to see what was in front of me instead of what I expected to see." "Still," he shook his head, "I got 7 solid leads today. 7. That's a month of work. Maybe more." "Good. You deserve it." They stood in her backyard as dusk settled over Portland, the new deck solid beneath their feet, and Natalie realized something had shifted. This wasn't just about a deck anymore. It wasn't about contractor and client, or even about fighting prejudice. It was about 2 people who'd started as strangers and somehow become something more. Not quite friends, but not quite not friends either. Something undefined and unexpected and maybe a little bit dangerous. "I should go," Darius said, but he didn't move. "Yeah," Natalie agreed, but she didn't want him to. He left 5 minutes later with a wave and a promise to send her the contact information for his lumber supplier, just in case she ever needed it. Natalie stood in her driveway, watching his taillights disappear, wondering when exactly she'd started hoping he'd stay longer. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Looking forward to dinner tomorrow. Your father can't stop talking about seeing the house." Natalie's stomach clenched. She'd been avoiding this conversation for weeks, but tomorrow it would be unavoidable. Her parents would see the deck, they'd ask who built it, and she'd have to decide how much truth to tell. She texted back, "See you at 6. Then she went inside, poured herself a large glass of wine, and prepared for the next battle she hadn't known she was signing up for. Sunday dinner with her parents had always been a performance, and Natalie had perfected her role over 34 years. Show them the successful daughter, the one who'd made partner track at 32, who owned a house in the right neighborhood, who dated the right kind of men and made the right kind of choices. Tonight felt different. Tonight she was walking onto a stage where the script had changed and she hadn't memorized her new lines. Her parents arrived at exactly 6 o'clock because Richard and Susan Whitaker didn't do fashionably late. They did punctual, proper, and perfectly pressed. Her father wore khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's car payments. Her mother had on her casual pearls, the ones she wore when she wanted to look effortless, but had actually spent 40 minutes getting ready. "Darling," her mother air-kissed both cheeks, the way she'd learned during their year in Paris when Natalie was 12. "The azaleas out front are spectacular. Did you finally hire that landscaper I recommended?" "Not yet. I've been focused on other projects." Natalie led them inside, watching her father's appraising eye take in every detail. He'd made his money in commercial real estate and treated every space like a potential investment. "The hardwoods still look good," he said, which from Richard Whittaker counted as effusive praise. "You're keeping up with the maintenance?" "I am. Actually, I just finished a major renovation. Want to see?" She led them through the kitchen to the back door, feeling her heart rate pick up with each step. This was ridiculous. She was a grown woman showing her parents a deck. There was no reason to feel like she was about to confess to a crime, but when her mother stepped onto the deck and gasped, Natalie's stomach clenched anyway. "Oh my God," Susan said, one hand pressed to her chest. "Natalie, this is gorgeous. When did you do this?" "Finished last month. The old deck was rotting. I almost fell through it in March." Her father was already testing the railings, checking the joints, running his hands along the wood like he was conducting an inspection. "This is exceptional craftsmanship. Who did the work?" Here it was, the moment of truth. Natalie took a breath and said, "A contractor named Darius Cole. Local guy, works solo. He did the entire project in 3 weeks." "Cole," her father repeated, still examining the deck. "I don't know that name. Which firm is he with?" "He's independent, runs his own business." Independent. Her mother's tone shifted slightly, like she'd just been served wine from a box instead of a bottle. "That's unusual for work this extensive. Most solo contractors can't handle structural projects." "Darius can. He used to be a project manager at Sierra West Construction before he went out on his own." Her father straightened up, his expression thoughtful. "Sierra West is a reputable firm. If he came from there, he must know what he's doing." He knocked on one of the support posts. "This is solid work. What did he charge you?" $15,000. Both parents stared at her. Her mother recovered first. 15? For all of this? Natalie, that seems... Are you sure the work is up to code? Fully permitted, fully inspected, fully insured. He just doesn't charge corporate markup because he doesn't have corporate overhead. Still, her father frowned. That's significantly below market rate. You checked his credentials? Licensed, insured, 12 years in business, 43 five-star reviews. I called every reference. He did everything exactly as promised, on time and under budget. Then why haven't I heard of him? Her father asked. If he's that good and that affordable, he should be booked solid for years. Natalie felt heat rising in her chest. Maybe because people like you haven't heard of him. Maybe because he doesn't advertise in the right places or network at the right country clubs. But his work speaks for itself. Her mother's eyes narrowed slightly. Darling, we're just asking questions. There's no need to be defensive. I'm not defensive. I'm proud. I hired someone who did exceptional work, treated my home with respect, and charged me fairly. That should be the end of the story. Of course it should, her father said in the tone he used when he was about to say something that meant the opposite. But you have to understand, when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. A contractor with those credentials, charging half the market rate, working completely solo, it raises questions. What questions? Natalie demanded. Be specific. Her parents exchanged a look, one of those wordless marital communications that had always made Natalie feel like an outsider in her own family. Finally, her mother said carefully, We just want to make sure you were safe, that's all. Having someone you don't know around your house, with access to everything, he's a licensed contractor, not a burglar. We know that, sweetheart, but you can't be too careful these days. There are people who take advantage of women living alone. Darius didn't take advantage of anyone. He did beautiful work and left my house cleaner than he found it every single day. Why is that so hard to accept? It's not hard to accept, her father said, his voice taking on the edge it got when he was losing patience. But it's naive to ignore reality. You're a successful woman with valuable assets. You need to be smart about who you trust. I was smart. I checked his background, called his references, reviewed his license and insurance. What more was I supposed to do? You could have hired someone from a reputable firm, her mother said. Someone with accountability. Someone whose background you could actually verify. I did verify his background. Through references he provided. Her father shook his head. Natalie, You're a lawyer. You know better than to accept information from interested parties without independent verification. Something snapped in Natalie's chest. You want independent verification? Darius Cole graduated top of his class from Portland Community College's construction management program. He worked at Sierra West for 6 years and left because he was tired of cutting corners to make corporate happy. He's been solo for 8 years, completed over 200 projects without a single complaint to the licensing board, and has a better safety record than most firms in this city. He's bonded for $2 million, carries comprehensive liability insurance, and pays his taxes on time every year. Is that verified enough for you? Her parents stared at her. The silence stretched long enough that Natalie could hear wind chimes from a neighbor's yard, could hear traffic from the street, could hear her own heart pounding in her ears. How do you know all that? Her mother finally asked. Because I did my homework. Because I treated him like a professional and respected his work enough to verify his credentials. Because that's what you're supposed to do when you hire someone. Evaluate them based on merit, not on whatever prejudices you're trying not to say out loud. Prejudices? Her father's voice went cold. Natalie, that's an ugly accusation. Then tell me what you're actually worried about. Because from where I'm standing, you're questioning the work of someone you've never met, based on nothing but the fact that he doesn't fit your idea of what a contractor should look like. We never said anything about what he looks like, her mother said quickly. You didn't have to. But let me save you the trouble of asking. Yes, Darius is black. And no, that's not why I hired him. I hired him because he was the only contractor in Portland who could start immediately, and he turned out to be the best contractor I've ever worked with. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine. Her father's face had gone red. We raised you better than to throw around accusations like that. Your mother and I have never judged people based on race. Really? Because 5 minutes ago you were ready to assume Darius was either incompetent or a criminal, and the only information you had was his price point and the fact that he works independently. You didn't question the credentials of the white contractors who renovated your kitchen last year, and they charged you twice what they should have. That's completely different. How? We knew them. They came recommended by the club. And Darius came recommended by 5 different clients who trusted him with their homes and their families. But that doesn't count because they're not members of your club. Her mother set down her wine glass with careful precision. Natalie, I think you're overreacting. We're simply concerned about your safety, which is what any parent would be. If you choose to interpret that as prejudice, that's your choice. But it's not fair and it's not accurate. You know what's not fair? Natalie's voice was shaking now. Having to defend a man's competence when you've never met him and his work is standing right in front of you. Having to justify my own judgment because I hired someone who doesn't look like what you expected. Having my own parents suggest I was reckless for trusting someone who's been nothing but professional. We never said you were reckless, her father said. You didn't have to. It's been implied in every question you've asked since you walked onto this deck. But Natalie crossed her arms. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to either trust my judgment and accept that I made a good choice, or you're going to leave. Because I'm not going to stand here and defend Darius Cole to people who've already decided he's not good enough without even meeting him. The silence that followed felt like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Her mother's face had gone pale. Her father looked like she'd slapped him. I think, her mother said finally, her voice tight, we should probably go. We'll talk when you're feeling less emotional. I'm not emotional. I'm angry. There's a difference. Clearly. Her father was already heading for the door. When you're ready to have a rational conversation, let us know. They left without saying goodbye. Natalie stood on her perfect deck, listening to their car pull away, feeling like she'd just set fire to her entire family in defense of a man she'd known for less than 2 months. Part of her wanted to run after them, apologize, smooth it over the way she always did. But a larger part, the part that had watched Darius sand railings by hand and explain systemic prejudice with weary patience, refused to back down. She was still standing there when her phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. Your mom just called me. Are you okay? Natalie stared at the message, feeling fresh anger surge. Of course her mother had called Vanessa. Of course they were already building their narrative, turning Natalie into the problem instead of examining their own assumptions. She texted back, I'm fine, and I'm not discussing this with you. Nat, come on. Your mom is worried. She said you accused them of racism? I pointed out their prejudice, which apparently counts as an accusation. Look, I get that you liked your contractor, but don't you think you're overreacting? They're your parents. They love you. Natalie typed and deleted 3 different responses before settling on, if they love me, they should trust my judgment. And if you can't understand why this matters, we don't have anything else to talk about. She blocked Vanessa's number before she could respond. Then she blocked her mother's number. Then she poured herself a very large glass of wine and sat on her deck in the gathering darkness, wondering when exactly her life had become a war zone. Her phone buzzed again. Patricia Chen. How did dinner with your parents go? Natalie almost laughed. Of course Patricia knew. She'd probably been through this exact conversation with her own family. She texted back, about as well as expected. Currently sitting on my deck drinking wine and wondering if I just disowned my entire family. Patricia's response came immediately. Want company? I can be there in 20 minutes. You don't have to do that. I know, but I remember this feeling. You shouldn't be alone. 20 minutes later, Patricia showed up with her husband David and a bottle of wine significantly better than what Natalie had been drinking. They sat on the deck together, watching Portland's lights come on across the valley, and Patricia told stories about the first year after she'd stood up to her sister. It was brutal, Patricia admitted. My whole family acted like I'd lost my mind. My mother kept calling, trying to mediate. My sister sent me articles about political correctness and virtue signaling. It took 6 months before anyone would admit that maybe, possibly, they'd been wrong. Did they ever actually apologize? Natalie asked. Some of them. My sister never did, but we reached a kind of truce. We don't talk about politics or social issues. We just stick to safe topics, kids, recipes, the weather. That sounds exhausting. It is, Patricia agreed. But the alternative was pretending I didn't see what I saw. And I couldn't do that anymore. Not after Darius. But David topped off their wine glasses. The thing people don't understand is that silence is complicity. When you don't speak up, you're telling the people being harmed that your comfort matters more than their dignity. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. My parents think I'm overreacting, Natalie said. They keep insisting they're just concerned about my safety. That race has nothing to do with it. Of course they do, Patricia said, because admitting their prejudice would require them to examine beliefs they've held their entire lives. It's easier to make you the problem. So what do I do? You hold the line. You refuse to pretend their concerns are legitimate when they're really just prejudice in disguise. And you wait. Either they'll come around or they won't. But you don't compromise who you are to make them comfortable. They stayed until midnight, talking and laughing and making Natalie feel less alone. After they left, she sat on her deck for another hour, thinking about lines in the sand and bridges burned and the cost of seeing clearly. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from Darius. Hey, hope your dinner went well. Just wanted to let you know I got 3 signed contracts from people who were at your party. Thank you doesn't feel like enough, but thank you. Natalie smiled, feeling something warm expand in her chest. She texted back, You earned those contracts with your work. I just gave you the opportunity to show it off. His response came quickly. Still, what you did matters, more than you know. She wanted to text back something profound, something that captured the mess of feelings tangled in her chest. Instead, she wrote, Want to grab coffee this week? Would love to hear how the new projects are going. There was a longer pause this time, long enough that Natalie started to regret the invitation. Then her phone lit up. Coffee sounds good. Wednesday? They met at the same cafe where Natalie had met Patricia, and somehow it felt both completely normal and utterly terrifying. Darius showed up in work clothes, straight from a job site, with sawdust in his hair and paint on his hands. He looked tired but happy, the kind of tired that came from good work well done. 3 projects, he said, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe it. All from your party, 2 decks and a full kitchen renovation. I'm booked solid through summer. That's incredible. It is. And it's because of you. He looked at her directly, his expression serious. Natalie, I've been doing this 12 years. I've had good clients before, but I've never had someone go to bat for me the way you did. Why? The question caught her off guard. She took a sip of her coffee, buying time to think. Because your work deserves to be recognized. Because competence should matter more than connections. Because she stopped, trying to find words for something she was still figuring out. Because once I saw the world the way you see it, I couldn't unsee it, and I couldn't stay quiet. That must have cost you. It did. I had a fight with my parents last weekend. Haven't spoken to them since. My best friend from law school and I aren't speaking either. My paralegal treats me like I've joined a cult. She laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. Turns out standing up for what's right is expensive. You can still walk it back, Darius said quietly. Apologize to your parents. Smooth things over with your friends. Pretend we never met. Nobody would blame you. Would you blame me? No. I'd understand. These are your people, your family. I'm just a contractor who built your deck. You're not just anything, Natalie said, surprised by the heat in her voice. You're someone who does exceptional work and deserves to be treated with respect. And if my family can't see that, they're the ones with the problem, not you. Darius studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You're serious about this? Completely serious. Even though it's cost you relationships? Even though people are questioning your judgment? Especially because of that. Because if people are questioning my judgment for treating you like a professional, that tells me everything I need to know about them. He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Then he said, My sister thinks I should ask you out. Natalie's heart stopped. What? My sister. She says I'm an idiot if I don't ask you out. He met her eyes, something vulnerable in his expression. But I told her it would be inappropriate. You're a client. You put your reputation on the line for me. The last thing you need is for people to think there was something else going on. Well, what if there is something else going on? The words were out before Natalie could stop them. Darius stared at her, his expression unreadable. Outside the cafe, Portland went about its business. People walking dogs, cars passing, the world turning like nothing had changed. But inside at their small table, everything hung suspended. Natalie, Darius said carefully, you need to think about what you're saying. If we cross that line, if this becomes personal instead of professional, it gets complicated. People already have questions about us. This would give them answers they could use against you. Let them. I'm serious. Your parents already think you made a mistake trusting me. Your friends are watching to see if you'll come to your senses. If we start dating, every single one of them will say they knew it all along, that you were reckless, that I took advantage, that this was never about work. But it was about work. You built my deck. You did an incredible job. Everything that happened after that, the party, the conversations, the way I started seeing the world differently, that's not you manipulating me. That's me growing up. They won't see it that way. I don't care how they see it. Natalie leaned forward. Darius, I'm 34 years old. I've spent my entire adult life making careful choices, dating appropriate men, building the right kind of life. And you know what? I'm exhausted. I'm tired of performing for people who don't actually know me. I'm tired of pretending that status matters more than character. I'm tired of being careful. So I'm your rebellion? Your way of proving you're not who they think you are? The question stung because there was truth in it, but there was more truth in what Natalie said next. You're not my rebellion. You're the first honest thing I've let into my life in years. You're someone who does what he says he's going to do, who charges what's fair instead of what he can get, who treats people with respect regardless of whether they deserve it. She stopped, feeling heat rise in her face. You're someone I want to know better. If that makes my life more complicated, so be it. Darius was quiet for a long time, long enough that Natalie started to regret every word. Then he said, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we cross this line, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun weekend dates and romantic dinners. People are going to stare. They're going to judge. Some of them are going to say ugly things, and some of those things are going to hurt. Your family might not come around. Your friends might not forgive you. And through all of that, you're going to have to be sure. Because I can't, his voice cracked slightly. I can't be someone's experiment. I can't be the guy you date to prove a point and then leave when it gets too hard. I would never do that to you. You say that now, but you don't know what it's like yet. You don't know what it feels like to walk into a restaurant and watch people's expressions change when they see us together. You don't know what it's like to have strangers make assumptions about our relationship, that I'm after your money, that you're slumming, that we couldn't possibly be together for real reasons. He held her gaze. I've done this before, Natalie. I've dated women outside my race. Some of them handled it. Most of them didn't. And I'm too old and too tired to go through that again with someone who's not sure. I'm sure. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you're still processing what happened with your family. You're still angry and hurt and looking for ways to prove they're wrong. I don't want to be your proof. I want to be your choice. And right now, I'm not convinced you know the difference. His words hit like cold water. Natalie sat back, feeling something deflate in her chest. Because he was right. She was angry. She was hurt. And some part of her definitely wanted to prove her parents wrong. Wanted to show them that she could see past their prejudices to the value underneath. But that wasn't all of it. That wasn't even most of it. You're right, she said quietly. I am angry, and I am trying to prove a point, but not to my parents, to myself. She looked up, meeting his eyes. I've spent my whole life being the person other people expected me to be. The perfect daughter, the ambitious lawyer, the woman who makes all the right choices. And somewhere along the way, I lost track of what I actually wanted, what I actually valued, what kind of person I actually wanted to be. She took a breath, steadying herself. You didn't cause that crisis, but you made me see it clearly. You showed me what integrity looks like, what it costs, why it matters. And yeah, part of me wants to date you to prove I'm different than my parents. But a bigger part of me just wants to be around someone who makes me want to be better. Someone who does the right thing even when it's expensive. Someone who... She stopped, suddenly afraid of how much she was revealing. Someone like you. Darius didn't respond immediately. He sat with her words, turning them over, testing their weight. Finally, he said, I need time to think about this. Okay. I'm not saying no, but I'm not saying yes either. I need to be sure I'm not setting myself up for something that's going to break me. He stood up, leaving money on the table for his coffee. Give me a week. I'll call you. He left before Natalie could respond. She sat alone in the cafe, feeling like she'd just laid herself bare for nothing. Like she'd confessed feelings she didn't know she had, only to be told to wait while someone decided if she was worth the risk. But underneath the hurt, she understood. She'd asked him to take a leap without proving she wouldn't let him fall. She'd asked him to trust that she was different, that she wouldn't crack under pressure, that her feelings were real. And he was right to be skeptical. She hadn't earned that trust yet. The week that followed was the longest of Natalie's life. She threw herself into work, taking on extra cases, staying late at the office, doing anything to avoid thinking about Darius's silence. Her mother called twice. Natalie let it go to voicemail. Vanessa sent a long text apologizing for not being more understanding. Natalie deleted it without reading past the first line. Patricia checked in daily, offering support without pushing for details. These things take time, she said when Natalie finally admitted what had happened. He's protecting himself. That's smart, not cruel. It feels cruel, I know. But you're asking him to trust you with something people have broken before. That's not a decision anyone makes lightly. On Friday evening, exactly 1 week after their coffee, Natalie's phone rang. Darius's name on the screen made her heart lurch. Hi, she said, trying to sound casual. Hi, can we talk? In person? They met at a park near her house, one with walking trails and enough space to have a conversation without feeling trapped. Darius was waiting on a bench when she arrived, looking nervous in a way she'd never seen him before. I thought about what you said, he began without preamble. About wanting to be around someone who makes you want to be better. About values and integrity and doing the right thing even when it's expensive. And I realized you've already proven all of that. You stood up to your family. You lost friends. You chose principle over comfort, even when it hurt. You didn't do any of that to impress me. You did it because it was right, because you couldn't unsee what you'd seen. He turned to face her fully. So here's what I'm thinking. We try this. Carefully, honestly, with clear communication and realistic expectations. We don't hide it, but we don't perform it either. We just see what this is when we stop being contractor and client and start being two people who might be falling for each other. Might be? He smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Okay, definitely are. But I'm trying to stay cool. How's that working for you? Terribly. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. Natalie, I need you to know this is going to be hard. Harder than you think. We're going to face situations where the easy thing is to walk away and you're going to have to choose to stay. Are you ready for that? She thought about her parents' cold silence, about friendships that had evaporated, about colleagues who looked at her differently now. She thought about the cost of seeing clearly and the price of choosing integrity over comfort. And she realized she'd already been paying it. Dating Darius wouldn't make her life harder. It would just make the struggle mean something more. I'm ready, she said. Are you? He kissed her instead of answering, and Natalie felt something click into place. Something that felt like coming home after years of living in houses that were never quite right. Something that felt like choosing herself for the first time in her life. When they finally pulled apart, Darius was smiling. So we're doing this. We're doing this. Your parents are going to lose their minds. Probably. But they lost me the moment they couldn't see what I saw in you. Natalie squeezed his hand. I'm done living for their approval. I'm ready to live for mine. They walked through the park as sunset painted Portland in gold and orange, talking about logistics and boundaries and how to navigate a relationship that the world would question at every turn. And somewhere between the walking and the talking, Natalie realized she wasn't scared anymore. She was free. Free to choose. Free to fail. Free to build something real with someone who'd already proven he was worth the fight. The hard part was just beginning, but for the first time in years, Natalie was ready for it. The reality of dating Darius hit Natalie before they even made it through their first real date. They'd chosen a restaurant in the Pearl District, nice but not ostentatious, the kind of place where professionals went for casual dinners. Natalie had dressed carefully, not too formal, not too casual, striking the balance between confident and approachable. Darius showed up in dark jeans and a button-down that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine, and for 5 blissful minutes in his truck, Natalie forgot about everything except how good it felt to be near him. Then they walked into the restaurant, and the hostess's smile flickered. It was subtle. So subtle that most people would have missed it. But Natalie saw it. The momentary surprise. The quick assessment. The recalibration as the woman's brain processed something she hadn't expected. 2 seconds, maybe 3, and then the professional mask was back in place. 2 for dinner? The hostess asked, her tone carefully neutral. Yes, please. Reservation under Cole. Darius's voice was easy, giving nothing away, but Natalie felt him tense slightly beside her, felt the shift in his energy from relaxed to watchful. They were seated at a table near the back, tucked into a corner that felt less like prime real estate and more like being hidden. Natalie wanted to say something, wanted to demand a better table, but Darius was already settling into his chair like nothing was wrong. You okay? He asked quietly, reading her face. That was deliberate, Natalie said, keeping her voice low. The table placement. She saw us and made a choice. Maybe. Or maybe this was the only table available. Darius, the restaurant is half empty. He sighed, picking up his menu. I know, but here's the thing. We could make a scene, demand a different table, prove that we notice. Or we can have a nice dinner and not let other people's nonsense ruin our first date. Which sounds better to you? Natalie wanted to fight, wanted to march back to the hostess stand and make the woman explain exactly why they'd been relegated to the worst table in the restaurant. But looking at Darius, at the careful control in his expression, the way he'd clearly fought this battle 1,000 times before, she realized this was her education beginning. This was what he'd tried to warn her about. Nice dinner, she said finally, but I'm leaving a terrible review. He smiled at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Deal. The rest of the evening was better. The food was good, the conversation was easy, and for long stretches Natalie forgot about the hostess and the table and the way people's eyes seemed to linger a moment too long when they passed. Darius told her about his latest project, a widow who needed her entire porch rebuilt but couldn't afford market rates, so he was doing it at cost. Natalie told him about a patent case she'd won that morning, one that had been grinding through the courts for 18 months. You're good at your job, Darius observed, watching her light up while describing the legal strategy. So are you. It's different. You're fighting for something bigger than yourself. I'm just building decks. You're not just building anything. You're giving people safe homes. You're treating them with dignity. You're running a business that proves you can do excellent work without exploiting people. Natalie reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Don't diminish what you do. It matters. His expression softened. You really believe that? I really do. They were finishing dessert when a man in an expensive suit stopped by their table. He was older, probably mid-50s, with the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. Excuse me, he said, addressing Natalie while ignoring Darius entirely. I couldn't help but notice you from across the room. Don't you work at Morrison & Pierce? Natalie's spine stiffened. I do. I thought so. I'm Robert Hastings. I handle commercial real estate for several of your firm's clients. We've probably been in meetings together. He extended his hand to Natalie, still not acknowledging Darius's presence. It's always nice to see familiar faces. This is Darius Cole, Natalie said pointedly, not taking Hastings' hand. My boyfriend. The word felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. Boyfriend. Like they were teenagers instead of adults navigating complicated terrain. But it felt right. Felt true. Hastings finally looked at Darius, his expression shifting into polite confusion. Ah, I see. Well, nice to meet you. He turned back to Natalie. We should grab lunch sometime. I'd love to discuss some upcoming projects. I'm pretty booked, Natalie said coolly, but you can call my office. Hastings left with a tight smile. The moment he was out of earshot, Darius said quietly, You didn't have to do that. Do what? Claim me like that? Call me your boyfriend in front of a business connection. That could have repercussions for you. Good. Let them repercuss. Natalie squeezed his hand. I'm not going to pretend you're invisible because some lawyer with delusions of importance can't be bothered to see you. That's not who I want to be. Even if it costs you clients? Especially then. If people won't work with me because I'm dating you, they're not people I want to work with anyway. Darius shook his head, but he was smiling. You're something else. Is that a compliment? The highest one I know. They left the restaurant hand in hand, and Natalie felt like she'd passed some kind of test. Not Darius's test, her own. The test of whether she'd meant what she said about choosing integrity over comfort. Whether she'd stand by him when it was easy or only when it was hard. The answer was both. She'd stand by him regardless. But the universe seemed determined to make sure she meant it. Over the next 2 weeks, Natalie discovered exactly how many microaggressions could fit into normal daily life. The barista who assumed they weren't together and tried to give them separate checks. The colleague who asked if Darius was really a contractor or just handy with repairs like the distinction mattered. Her neighbor who mentioned that there was a strange truck parked in Natalie's driveway multiple times, even though Darius's work vehicle had his company name plastered across the side. Each incident was small. Individually, they could be explained away as misunderstandings or coincidences. But collectively, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. The world looked at them and saw something that didn't compute, something that needed to be questioned or explained or fixed. Darius handled it with the weary patience of someone who'd been dealing with this his entire life. Natalie handled it with escalating fury that sometimes surprised even her. She'd never considered herself particularly confrontational. She was a lawyer. She believed in systems, procedures, rational discourse. But watching someone treat Darius as less than because of their own prejudices made her want to burn those systems to the ground. You're going to give yourself an ulcer, Darius said one evening after Natalie spent 20 minutes ranting about a waiter who'd asked if they wanted separate checks for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. He knows we're together. We were literally holding hands when he approached the table. I know. So why does he keep asking? Because he can't compute it, Darius said simply. He was lying on her couch, head in her lap, completely relaxed despite the conversation. His brain sees a white woman and a black man and refuses to believe we're a couple, so every time we show up, his brain resets and he has to ask again. That's insane. That's reality. He looked up at her, his expression gentle. Baby, you're going to drive yourself crazy if you try to fight every single instance of this. Some battles are worth fighting, some aren't. You need to learn the difference. How do you decide which is which? Ask myself if fighting will change anything or just make me tired. He sat up, turning to face her properly. That waiter? He's going to keep making that mistake regardless of how many times you correct him. His prejudice is his problem, not ours. But someone who tries to deny us service or discriminates against us in a meaningful way, that's worth fighting. I hate that you've had to develop that calculus. So do I. But it's kept me sane. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. I don't need you to fight every battle for me. I just need you to see them. And you do. That matters more than you know. Natalie wanted to do more than see. She wanted to fix, to change, to force people to acknowledge their prejudices and do better. But she was learning that wasn't how this worked. Change happened slowly, in small moments, through choices that accumulated over time. Like the choice she made when her mother finally broke the 3-week silence with a text that read, "Your father and I would like to talk. Can you come to dinner this Sunday?" Natalie stared at the message for a full minute before showing it to Darius. They were at his house for the first time, a beautifully restored Craftsman in northeast Portland that he'd renovated himself. Every detail was perfect, from the built-in bookshelves to the exposed beam ceilings to the kitchen that looked like something from an architectural magazine. "What do you want to do?" Darius asked, reading the text over her shoulder. "I don't know. Part of me wants to ignore it. But part of me—" She stopped, trying to articulate the complicated tangle of feelings. "Part of me misses them. Even though they hurt me, even though they can't see what I see. They're still my parents. So go to dinner." "You think I should?" "I think you should do whatever feels right for you. If that means trying to rebuild the relationship, try. If it means walking away permanently, walk away. But don't make the decision based on me. Make it based on what you need." Natalie turned to face him fully. "What if I want you to come with me?" Darius went very still. "To dinner? With your parents?" "Yes." "Natalie, that's—" He shook his head. "That's asking for a confrontation. Your parents already have problems with me, and I've never even met them. Showing up at their dinner table isn't going to make things better." "Maybe not. But it'll make my position clear. I'm with you. They can accept that or not. But I'm not going to keep you separate from my life to make them comfortable." "That's a big step." "I know, but I'm ready for it. The question is, are you?" He studied her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing risks and benefits, measuring what this might cost them both. Finally, he said, "If we do this, we do it right. No ambushing them. You call, tell them you're bringing someone, give them a chance to say no. And if they say no, then you have your answer about whether they're willing to meet you halfway." Natalie called her mother the next morning. The conversation was stiff, awkward, neither of them willing to address the fight that had preceded the silence. But when Natalie said, "I'd like to bring someone to dinner," her mother's response was immediate. "Vanessa, of course she can come." "Not Vanessa, my boyfriend, Darius." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Natalie checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Finally, her mother said carefully, "The contractor?" "Yes, we've been dating for 3 weeks. I'd like you and Dad to meet him." Another pause. Then, "Natalie, I don't think that's a good idea." "Why not?" "Because we're still processing everything that happened last time. Bringing him into it seems premature." "Mom, I'm 34 years old. I don't need your permission to date someone, but I'm trying to include you in my life. I'm trying to give you a chance to see what I see. If you're not ready for that, tell me now." She heard her mother take a breath, heard the sound of a hand covering the phone, heard muffled conversation with her father. When Susan came back on the line, her voice was tight but controlled. 6 o'clock. "And Natalie, we expect appropriate behavior from both of you." "We're not children, Mom. We know how to behave at dinner." "I'm sure you do. We'll see you Sunday." The call ended before Natalie could respond. She stood in her kitchen, phone in hand, feeling like she'd just won a battle but lost ground in a larger war. Darius came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "She said yes?" he asked. "She said yes, but she made it sound like we're being granted an audience with royalty. We kind of are. This is their territory, their rules, their comfort zone. We're the invaders." I hate that framing. So do I. but it's accurate. He kissed the top of her head. We'll get through it, together. Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect late April weather that made Portland feel like paradise. Natalie changed her outfit 3 times before settling on something that threaded the needle between casual and professional. Nice jeans, a silk blouse, understated jewelry. Darius showed up at her door in slacks and a sweater that made him look like he belonged in a J. Crew catalog, and for a moment Natalie just stared. "What?" he asked, self-conscious. "Nothing. You look amazing." "I look like I'm trying too hard." "You look perfect." She grabbed her purse and her keys. "Ready?" "Absolutely not. Let's go." The drive to her parents' house in West Lynn took 25 minutes that felt like hours. Natalie's hands were sweating on the steering wheel. Darius sat in the passenger seat, outwardly calm but with tension in his jaw that gave him away. They'd talked through strategies last night. Stay polite, don't rise to bait, present a united front. But all the planning in the world couldn't prepare Natalie for the reality of walking into her childhood home with the man her parents had already decided was a mistake. Her father opened the door before they could knock. Richard Whittaker looked older than Natalie remembered. Or maybe she was just seeing him more clearly. He was dressed in his standard weekend uniform, expensive casual, the kind of clothes that cost more than they should and signaled status without trying. His expression was carefully neutral as he looked at Darius, not hostile, but not welcoming either. "Dad, this is Darius Cole." "Darius, my father, Richard." The 2 men shook hands with the careful formality of diplomats negotiating a truce. "Mr. Whittaker," Darius said, "thank you for having me." "It's our daughter's home as much as ours," Richard replied, which wasn't exactly a welcome but wasn't a dismissal either. "Come in." The house smelled like her mother's signature roast chicken, the same dish she'd been making for Sunday dinners since Natalie was a child. The familiar scent should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a trap, like she was being lured into false security before the real battle began. Her mother appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Susan Whittaker had dressed for the occasion too, slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Natalie's monthly grocery budget. She looked at Darius the way someone might look at an exotic animal in a zoo, curious, wary, unsure whether it was dangerous. "Mrs. Whittaker," Darius said, extending his hand. "It's nice to meet you." Susan shook his hand briefly, her smile tight. "Darius, please, make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes. They moved into the living room, settling into furniture that Natalie had known her entire life. Her father took his usual chair. Her mother perched on the edge of the sofa. Darius sat next to Natalie on the love seat, close but not touching, and the space between their bodies felt like a chasm. "So," Richard said after a moment of excruciating silence, "Darius, Natalie tells us you're a contractor." "That's right. I run my own renovation business. Decks, kitchens, structural repairs. Been doing it about 8 years now." "And before that?" "Project management at Sierra West Construction. 6 years." Richard nodded slowly, processing this information like he was conducting a job interview. "Why did you leave?" Natalie felt Darius tense slightly beside her, but his voice remained even. "I wanted more control over the quality of my work. Corporate construction prioritizes speed and profit margin over craftsmanship. I prefer to do fewer projects at a higher standard." "That's admirable," Susan said, though her tone suggested she found it anything but. "But surely the financial stability of a corporate position has its advantages." "It does. But I sleep better knowing the work I do meets my standards, not someone else's bottom line." "How idealistic," Richard said, and the word hung in the air like an accusation. Natalie felt anger surge in her chest, but before she could respond, Darius said calmly, "Idealistic would be doing it for free. I charge fair rates for quality work. That's just good business." "Of course." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Darius with the same assessing look he probably used in boardrooms. "Natalie mentioned you worked on her deck. She was very pleased with the results." "The previous structure was dangerous. I'm glad we caught it before anyone got hurt." "Yes, well." Susan stood abruptly. "I should check on dinner. Natalie, would you help me in the kitchen?" It wasn't a request. Natalie followed her mother out of the room, leaving Darius alone with her father in what felt like an act of betrayal. In the kitchen, Susan busied herself with unnecessary tasks, adjusting already perfect place settings, checking food that didn't need checking. "Mom," Natalie said quietly, "what are you doing?" "I'm making dinner." "You're avoiding, just like you're making Dad interrogate Darius instead of actually talking to him." Susan stopped moving, her hands pressed flat against the counter. "What exactly would you like me to say, Natalie? That I'm thrilled you're dating someone we know nothing about? That I'm perfectly comfortable with this situation? I'd like you to give him a chance to see him as a person instead of a problem." "We're trying." "No, you're not. You're putting him through an interview like he's applying for permission to date me. He doesn't need your permission. I'm trying to include you in my life. But if you can't treat him with basic respect, this is the last time I'll try." Her mother turned to face her, and Natalie saw something that looked like pain in her expression. "Do you have any idea how hard this is for us? Watching you make choices we don't understand? Choices that could hurt you? How exactly is dating Darius going to hurt me? People will judge you. They'll make assumptions. Your career could suffer." "My career is fine. My life is fine. The only thing that's suffering is my relationship with you, because you can't see past your own prejudices long enough to acknowledge that Darius is a good man who treats me well." "I'm sure he's perfectly nice," Susan said, her voice tight. "But nice isn't enough. You come from different worlds, Natalie. Different backgrounds, different expectations, different races. Say it, Mom. That's what you actually mean. That's not fair, isn't it? Because from where I'm standing, that's the only actual objection you have. He's educated, he's successful, he's respectful. The only thing wrong with him is that he doesn't look like the men you imagined me dating." Susan's face flushed. "You're putting words in my mouth. I'm saying what you won't. And until you can be honest about what's really bothering you, we're never going to get past this." They stared at each other across the kitchen island, years of unspoken tensions crystallizing into this single moment. Finally, Susan said, "Dinner's ready. Let's not ruin it with a fight." "We're not fighting. We're finally being honest." But Susan had already left the kitchen, carrying serving dishes into the dining room like nothing had happened. Natalie stood alone, feeling like she'd lost another battle she hadn't known she was fighting. Dinner was excruciating. They sat at the formal dining table, Natalie and Darius on one side, her parents on the other, and made stilted conversation about safe topics. The weather, current events, a movie Susan had seen, anything except the obvious tension filling the room like smoke. Richard asked Darius about his business, his questions carefully neutral but implying doubt at every turn. How did he market himself? What was his client retention rate? How did he handle liability insurance as a solo operator? Each question was designed to probe for weakness, to find the flaw that would prove Darius wasn't good enough. And Darius answered every single one with calm professionalism, never rising to the bait, never showing the frustration that Natalie knew he must be feeling. He talked about his business model, his quality standards, his plans for sustainable growth. He was articulate, intelligent, and completely unflappable, which only seemed to make Richard more determined to find something wrong. "What about expansion?" her father asked as they finished the main course. "Surely working solo limits your growth potential. Have you considered bringing on employees?" "I've considered it," Darius said, "but quality control becomes more difficult with a larger team. Right now I can guarantee that every project meets my standards because I'm doing the work myself. That's worth more to me than rapid expansion." "But it's not sustainable long term. What happens when you get older? When you physically can't do the work anymore?" "I'll adapt. Maybe take on apprentices. Focus on project management instead of hands-on work. But that's years away. Right now I'm building a reputation and a client base that values craftsmanship." "Craftsmanship doesn't pay retirement bills," Richard said. "Neither does compromising my values." Darius set down his fork with deliberate care. "Mr. Whitaker, I appreciate your concern about my business model, but I've been supporting myself successfully for 12 years. I own my home, I have savings, I pay my taxes, and I sleep well at night. That's more than a lot of people can say." The temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Susan made a small sound that might have been distress. Richard's expression hardened into something cold and dismissive. "I'm sure it is," Richard said, "but Natalie is accustomed to a certain lifestyle. She has expectations." "Dad," Natalie's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Stop. I'm simply being realistic. You're being insulting. To both of us. She turned to Darius. I'm sorry. We should go. Natalie, don't be dramatic, her mother said. We're just having a conversation. No, you're interrogating my boyfriend like he's a criminal. You're implying he's not good enough, that I'm making a mistake, that our relationship can't possibly work. Natalie stood up, her hands shaking. I came here hoping you'd give him a chance. Give us a chance. But you've already decided we're wrong, and nothing I say is going to change your mind. We're trying to protect you, Richard said. From what? From being happy? From being with someone who treats me with respect and kindness? From building a relationship based on actual values instead of status and appearances? From making a choice you'll regret, Susan said quietly. Darling, you're in the honeymoon phase. Everything seems perfect now. But what happens when reality sets in? When the differences become too much? What differences, Mom? Be specific. Her parents exchanged another one of those loaded glances. Finally, Richard said, cultural differences, background differences. The fact that you come from completely different worlds. We come from the same city. We're both college-educated professionals. We both value integrity and hard work. The only difference that actually matters to you is race, and you can't even admit it. That's not true, Susan said, but her voice wavered. Then what is it? Tell me one legitimate reason why Darius and I shouldn't be together. One reason that isn't based on prejudice or classism or your inability to see him as anything other than the contractor. Silence. Long, horrible silence that answered every question Natalie had been afraid to ask. Darius stood slowly, his hand finding Natalie's. Thank you for dinner, he said to her parents, his voice even, despite the tension radiating from his body. I'm sorry we couldn't reach an understanding. Darius? Susan started, but he shook his head. It's fine, Mrs. Whitaker. I understand. Not everyone can get past their expectations long enough to see what's actually in front of them. He looked at Natalie. Ready? They left without another word, walking out into the cool evening air like refugees escaping a war zone. Natalie didn't realize she was crying until they reached her car and Darius pulled her into his arms. I'm so sorry, she sobbed into his chest. I'm so sorry they treated you like that. Hey, it's okay. I knew this wouldn't be easy. It's not okay. They were horrible. They didn't even try. No, they didn't. He held her tighter. But you did. You stood up for me. You called them out. You chose us over their approval. That matters more than you know. I just wanted them to see what I see. Some people can't, or won't. And that's on them, not us. He pulled back enough to look at her face, wiping away tears with his thumbs. Natalie, I need you to understand something. This is going to happen again. Maybe not with your parents, but with other people. Colleagues, friends, strangers on the street. And every time it happens, you're going to have to choose, us or their comfort. Can you handle that? Yes, she said without hesitation. I can handle anything as long as you're with me. Then we're going to be fine. He kissed her forehead, soft and gentle. Let's go home. They drove back to her house in silence, hands linked across the center console, and Natalie felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd lost her parents tonight, maybe not permanently, but definitely for now. She'd burned that bridge in defense of something real, something worth fighting for. And she didn't regret it, not even a little bit. When they got inside, Darius pulled her close and held her while she cried out the grief and anger and relief of finally choosing herself. And when the tears finally stopped, they sat on her deck, the deck he'd built, the deck that had started everything, and talked until dawn about futures and families, and the families you build when the one you were born into can't see who you've become. I love you, Natalie said as the sun rose over Portland, the words falling out before she could stop them. I know it's too soon and we're in the middle of a mess, but I love you, and I needed you to know. Darius smiled, his eyes bright in the early morning light. It's not too soon, and I love you too. Have for weeks, actually. Just didn't know how to say it. How about like that? Just say it. I love you, he repeated, and it sounded like a promise. We're going to make this work. And sitting there on the deck where everything had started, watching the city wake up around them, Natalie believed him. The weeks following the disastrous dinner became a test of everything Natalie thought she knew about herself. Her mother called twice, left voicemails that Natalie couldn't bring herself to listen to. Her father sent a single text that read, "When you're ready to discuss this rationally, we'll be here." She deleted it without responding. Work became complicated in ways she hadn't anticipated. Nothing overt, nothing she could point to as discrimination, just a subtle shift in how people treated her. Colleagues who used to invite her to lunch stopped asking. Senior partners seemed less interested in her input during meetings. And when she mentioned Darius in conversation, casually, the way anyone might mention their partner, she noticed the way people's expressions would flicker just for a moment before they remembered to smile. Monica, her paralegal, requested a transfer to another attorney's office. She framed it as wanting new challenges, but they both knew the truth. Monica couldn't work for someone whose judgment she fundamentally questioned, and Natalie couldn't work with someone who saw her relationship as a mistake. "I'm sorry it came to this," Monica said on her last day, packing up her desk with careful precision. "I hope you understand it's not personal." "It is personal," Natalie said quietly. "That's exactly what it is. But I understand. Good luck with your new position." They didn't hug goodbye. Monica left with a polite nod, and Natalie stood in the empty office wondering how many more relationships she'd lose before people stopped counting. The answer, it turned out, was more than she'd expected, but fewer than she'd feared. Some friends disappeared completely, their texts going unanswered, their invitations drying up like they'd never existed. But others surprised her. Her college roommate Sarah called one evening, 3 weeks into the silence from her parents, and said, "I heard about your family situation. That's rough. Want to grab dinner and talk about it?" They met at a Thai place in Hawthorne, and Sarah listened while Natalie poured out the whole story. The deck, the prejudice, the fight with her parents, the way loving Darius had somehow become an act of rebellion. "Your parents are wrong," Sarah said when Natalie finally ran out of words. "And I'm sorry you're going through this, but for what it's worth, I'm proud of you. You're choosing love over approval. That takes guts." "It doesn't feel like guts. It feels like I'm constantly fighting battles I shouldn't have to fight." "That's because you are. The world's not ready for people who refuse to stay in their assigned boxes." Sarah reached across the table, squeezing Natalie's hand. "But you're doing it anyway. That matters." Other people stepped up too. Patricia Chen became more than just a fellow Darius client. She became a genuine friend, someone Natalie could call when the weight of it all felt crushing. David, Patricia's husband, introduced Natalie to other interracial couples who'd navigated similar terrain, people who understood the specific exhaustion of being questioned constantly. "It gets easier," one woman told her over coffee. "Not because people get better, but because you stop caring what they think. You build your own community, your own support system, and eventually other people's opinions just become noise." "How long did that take?" "About 2 years, maybe 3. The woman smiled. "But it was worth it. My husband and I have been together 15 years now. We have 2 kids, a life we love, and exactly 0 tolerance for people who can't see past their own prejudices." Natalie clung to these conversations like lifelines, proof that what she and Darius were building wasn't impossible, just difficult. And difficult was something she could handle. Darius handled it by working. He threw himself into projects with focused intensity, building decks and renovating kitchens, and slowly expanding his business into something bigger than a one-man operation. The contacts from Natalie's garden party had turned into steady work, which had turned into referrals, which had turned into more projects than he could handle alone. "I'm thinking about hiring someone," he told Natalie one evening in late June. They were at his house, sprawled on his couch after dinner, the kind of comfortable domesticity that felt both ordinary and miraculous. "Maybe an apprentice. Someone young, eager to learn, willing to meet my standards." "That's huge," Natalie said, turning to look at him. "I thought you didn't want employees." "I didn't, but I'm turning down good work because I can't take on more projects. And I keep thinking about what your dad said, about sustainability, about what happens when I get older. Maybe he had a point. Don't give him that much credit." Darius smiled, but it was tired around the edges. "He was a jerk, but he wasn't wrong about everything. I can't do this solo forever. And if I'm going to expand, I want to do it right. Train someone properly, pay them fairly, build something that lasts." "You're going to be an amazing mentor." "I'm going to try." He pulled her closer, his arms solid and warm around her shoulders. "How are you doing? Really?" Natalie considered lying, painting everything as fine and manageable. But Darius had been honest with her from the beginning about the costs, the challenges, the reality of what they were choosing. He deserved the same honesty back. "I'm tired," she admitted. "I'm tired of being judged. Tired of losing people I thought were friends. Tired of walking into rooms and feeling people's eyes on us, waiting for us to fail. Some days I wonder if it would be easier to just walk away." He said it gently, without accusation, giving her space to be honest, even if the honesty hurt. "No, not that. Never that." She shifted to look at him directly. "I was going to say easier to disappear. Move somewhere new where nobody knows us. Where we could just be a couple instead of a statement." "We could do that. Would you want to?" Darius was quiet for a long moment, his hand tracing absent patterns on her arm. "Part of me would. The part that's tired of fighting, tired of explaining, tired of being the example everyone points to. But another part, the part that built a business on integrity, that part says we don't run. We stay. We prove that this works, not just for us, but for everyone watching who's afraid to try. That's a lot of pressure." "It is, but we're already carrying it. Might as well carry it somewhere we can make a difference." He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, I'm not letting your parents win by driving you out of town. That would make them insufferably smug." Natalie laughed despite herself. "True, my mother would absolutely take credit for bringing me to my senses. See? We have to stay just to spite them. Is spite a good foundation for major life decisions? It's worked so far." They fell into comfortable silence, and Natalie felt the tension in her chest ease slightly. This was what mattered, not her parents' approval or her colleagues' opinions or strangers' assumptions. This, the quiet evenings, the easy conversations, the way Darius made her feel seen and valued, and enough exactly as she was. 2 weeks later, Darius hired his first apprentice, a 23-year-old named Marcus, who'd been working construction jobs that treated him like disposable labor. Natalie watched Darius teach Marcus the same meticulous standards he'd applied to her deck, watched him explain not just how to do the work, but why it mattered, and felt something like pride bloom in her chest. "You're good at this," she told him one evening after Marcus had left for the day. They were at a client's house in Selwood, watching Darius inspect the deck Marcus had helped build. "The teaching thing, you're really good at it. He makes it easy. Kid's hungry to learn, willing to listen, doesn't cut corners." Darius tested a railing joint, nodded his satisfaction. "Reminds me of myself at that age, except someone's actually teaching him properly instead of making him figure it out alone." "Are you going to hire more people?" "Maybe, eventually, but I want to make sure I can do this right before I expand too fast. Marcus deserves my full attention right now." It was such a Darius answer, thoughtful, principled, focused on doing things well instead of doing them quickly. Natalie had spent her career in a world that valued speed and scale and growth at any cost. Being with Darius was teaching her that there were other ways to measure success. She was learning that lesson in her own career, too. In August, she turned down a promotion that would have required relocating to the firm's Seattle office. The partners were confused. This was the kind of opportunity associates fought for, the fast track to equity partnership and real power. But Natalie had looked at the offer and seen what it would cost. Leaving Darius, leaving the community they were building, leaving the version of herself she was finally becoming. "I'm happy where I am," she told the senior partner who'd offered her the position. "I appreciate the opportunity, but Portland is home." "This is about your personal life, isn't it?" The partner, Gerald Morrison, 63 and convinced that dedication meant sacrificing everything for work, looked disappointed. "Natalie, you're one of our best young attorneys. Don't throw that away for a relationship." "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing a life that includes both my career and my relationship." "If that's not possible here, maybe I'm at the wrong firm." Morrison's expression shifted from disappointed to concerned. "Are you threatening to leave?" "I'm clarifying my priorities. I'll work hard. I'll serve my clients well. But I won't sacrifice my personal life for a promotion. If that makes me less valuable to the firm, we should probably discuss that now." She left his office unsure whether she'd just saved her relationship or torpedoed her career. But when she told Darius that evening, he pulled her into his arms and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I didn't ask you to do that," he said into her hair. "I know, but I wanted to. I'm tired of pretending work is the only thing that matters. I'm tired of being the person who sacrifices everything for success." She pulled back to look at him. "You taught me that there are other ways to live, ways that don't require me to be miserable to be successful." "I love you," he said simply. "I love you for choosing us, but I also need you to know I never want to be the reason you regret your choices. You won't be. This isn't about you or us. It's about me finally figuring out what kind of person I want to be." "And what kind of person is that?" "The kind who builds things that last, the kind who values integrity over prestige, the kind who—" She stopped, feeling tears prick her eyes. "The kind who learned from the best contractor in Portland that doing things right is more important than doing them fast." He kissed her then, deep and slow, and Natalie felt like she was finally home. Fall arrived with the kind of dramatic color that made Portland feel like a postcard. The leaves turned gold and red and orange, and Natalie's deck, the deck that had started everything, became her favorite place to drink morning coffee and watch the city wake up. She and Darius had fallen into a rhythm that felt sustainable, seeing each other most evenings but maintaining their own spaces, building a relationship instead of rushing into one. They talked about the future sometimes, carefully, testing whether their visions aligned. Darius wanted to eventually buy a larger property, something with space for a workshop and maybe room to expand his business. Natalie wanted to shift her practice toward pro bono work, using her legal skills to help people who couldn't afford expensive attorneys. Neither of them mentioned marriage explicitly, but it hovered in the background of these conversations like a promise they weren't quite ready to make. Then October brought 2 phone calls that changed everything. The first came from Natalie's mother on a Tuesday evening. Natalie almost didn't answer. They'd been in a Cold War for 6 months, exchanging only the bare minimum of holiday texts, but something made her pick up. "Natalie." Her mother's voice was thick, like she'd been crying. "It's your father. He had a heart attack this morning. He's stable now, but can you come to the hospital?" Natalie was in her car within 5 minutes, driving to Legacy Emanuel with her heart in her throat. She called Darius from the road, her voice shaking, and he said immediately, "I'm meeting you there." "You don't have to." "I'm meeting you there," he repeated, firm and gentle. "You shouldn't be alone." Her father looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished in a way that made Natalie's chest ache. He was connected to monitors and IVs, his face pale, and for the first time in her life he looked actually vulnerable instead of just carefully controlled. Her mother sat in a chair beside the bed, gripping Richard's hand like she could keep him alive through sheer force of will. She looked up when Natalie entered, relief and grief and something else flickering across her face. "He's going to be okay," Susan said, like she was trying to convince herself. "The doctor said he'll need surgery, but he's going to be okay." Natalie moved to her father's other side, taking his free hand carefully. "Dad, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with effort. "Natalie," he said, his voice rough. "You came." "Of course I came. You're my father." "I wasn't sure. After everything—" He stopped, too tired to finish the thought. "We can talk about that later. Right now you need to rest and get better." She stayed for 2 hours, sitting with her mother in tense silence, watching monitors beep and trying not to think about mortality and unfinished business. When Darius arrived with coffee and sandwiches from the cafeteria, Susan looked at him with an expression Natalie couldn't quite read. "Darius," her mother said slowly, "thank you for coming." "Of course, Mrs. Whitaker. How's he doing?" "Stable. They're scheduling surgery for tomorrow morning." Susan accepted the coffee he offered her, holding it between her hands like it could warm something deeper than her skin. "It was kind of you to bring food." "Natalie needed to be here. I figured the least I could do was make sure she ate." They sat together in the waiting room, the 3 of them, and slowly the walls began to crack. Susan asked Darius about his work, really asked, not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. He told her about Marcus, about the business growing, about the satisfaction of teaching someone to build things that would last. And Susan listened, actually listened, in a way she hadn't during that awful dinner. When Natalie walked Darius out hours later, she was exhausted and grateful in equal measure. "Thank you for being here. I know it couldn't have been easy. Your mom was different tonight." Crisis has a way of clarifying things. Maybe almost losing Dad made her realize some battles aren't worth fighting. Or maybe she's just scared and needed support, and I was here to give it. He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "Either way, I'm glad I could help. Call me after his surgery tomorrow?" "I will. I love you." "I love you too. Go take care of your family." Her father's surgery went well, and over the next week, Natalie found herself spending more time at the hospital than she had at her parents' house in months. And slowly, gradually, something shifted. Her father, humbled by his own mortality, started actually talking to her instead of lecturing. Her mother, worn down by fear and exhaustion, started asking questions about Darius that sounded like genuine interest instead of veiled criticism. "He came every day this week," Susan said one evening after Darius had left. She and Natalie were alone in the hospital room while Richard slept. Brought coffee, sat with us, never made it about him or your relationship, just showed up. "That's who he is, Mom. That's what I've been trying to tell you." "I know, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Susan's voice wavered. "I'm sorry about a lot of things. About the way we treated him at dinner, about questioning your judgment, about making you choose between us and him." "I didn't choose. You did. You're the ones who couldn't accept that I'm an adult who makes her own decisions." "You're right, we did." Susan reached for Natalie's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "But if you're willing to give us another chance, a real chance, we'd like to try again. Your father and I talked while he was recovering, about prejudices we didn't want to admit we had, about how close we came to losing you over beliefs that don't actually matter." "They matter to me, Mom. They matter a lot." "I know, and we're going to do better. We want to do better. Darius is part of your life. And if we want to be part of your life too, we need to accept that. Really accept it, not just tolerate it." Natalie felt tears sting her eyes. "I want that too, but I need you to understand. If you can't treat him with respect, if you can't see him the way I see him, I will choose him over you every single time." "I wouldn't expect anything less." Susan smiled through her own tears. "He's a good man, Natalie. I'm sorry it took almost losing your father for me to see it clearly, but I see it now." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. A tentative bridge being built across 6 months of silence and hurt. And when Natalie told Darius that evening, he held her while she cried and told her he was proud of her. "For what?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "For holding the line. For not backing down just because it was hard. For teaching your parents that respecting you means respecting your choices." He kissed her softly. "Not everyone has that kind of strength." The second phone call came in November, from a number Natalie didn't recognize. She answered expecting a telemarketer and instead got a voice she knew too well. "Natalie, it's Brian Porter. Your attorney?" "Brian, hi. What's going on?" "I have a proposition for you, actually more like an opportunity." He sounded excited in a way that made Natalie nervous. "Remember that pro bono work you mentioned wanting to do? I've been talking to some colleagues and we're thinking about starting a nonprofit legal clinic. Patent law, business formation, contract review, services for small business owners who can't afford traditional representation. And we want you to run it." Natalie's heart started pounding. "Run it? Brian, I don't have nonprofit experience." "You have legal expertise and a passion for helping people who get overlooked by the traditional system. That's what we need. The funding's in place, we have space lined up, and we have clients already asking for services. We just need someone to build the thing. Someone who understands that the law should serve everyone, not just people who can afford $500 hourly rates." "When would this start?" "January, ideally. We'd need you to leave Morrison and Pierce, obviously, but we're offering a competitive salary and actual control over your work-life balance. Think about it. Talk to Darius." "But Natalie, this is what you've been moving toward. This is your chance to build something that matters." She said yes before she fully processed what she was agreeing to. Then she drove to Darius's house and told him she'd just quit her job to start a legal clinic for small business owners. "I'm terrified," she admitted, pacing his living room while he watched her with amusement. "What if I can't do it? What if nobody needs the services? What if I just threw away a stable career for a nonprofit that fails in 6 months? Or, Darius said calmly, what if you just found your purpose? What if this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing? How can you be so sure? Because I've watched you for the past 9 months. I've watched you fight for integrity, for fairness, for people who don't have power. This isn't a risk, Natalie. This is you finally doing work that aligns with who you actually are. You think I can do this? I know you can do this, and I'll be here supporting you every step of the way. She launched the clinic in January, working 18-hour days to build systems and processes and establish credibility. And one of her first clients was a young contractor named Marcus, Darius's apprentice, who needed help forming an LLC and understanding business licensing requirements. Darius said you could help, Marcus said nervously, sitting in Natalie's new office with paperwork clutched in his hands. I want to make sure I'm doing everything legal and right, but I can't afford a regular lawyer. That's exactly why we're here, Natalie told him, taking the paperwork and already seeing 3 mistakes that could have cost him thousands in penalties. Let's make sure you're set up properly. Word spread quickly. Within 3 months, Natalie had a waiting list of small business owners who needed legal services they couldn't otherwise afford. Contractors, restaurant owners, artists, craftspeople, people who were building businesses on integrity and needed someone who understood that values mattered as much as profit margins. And through it all, Darius was there, supporting her when she doubted herself, celebrating her victories, reminding her that building something worthwhile took time. They fell into a new rhythm, both running businesses they'd built from scratch, both working to prove that there were other ways to measure success. In April, 1 year after that first garden party, they moved in together. Not to her house or his, but to a new place they chose together. A Craftsman in Northeast Portland that needed renovation, which they tackled as a team. Darius handled the structural work. Natalie managed the permits and paperwork, and slowly, room by room, they built a home that belonged to both of them. Her parents came to the housewarming party, brought expensive wine, and spent the evening talking to Darius about carpentry and business and everything except the elephant that had once filled every room. Richard asked Darius for advice on a deck project. Susan complimented the finish work and meant it. And when they left, Susan hugged Natalie tight and whispered, "I'm proud of you. Of both of you." It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still conversations that required careful navigation, still the occasional comment that revealed old prejudices weren't fully buried. But it was progress. Real, meaningful progress built on choice and commitment and the slow work of change. 2 years after the deck that started everything, Darius proposed on that same deck, the original one he'd built, in Natalie's old house that she'd decided to keep as rental property. He got down on one knee on the smooth boards he'd hand-sanded and asked if she'd marry him surrounded by the foundation that had changed both their lives. "Yes," Natalie said before he finished the question. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They got married in September in a ceremony that blended both their families and all the people who'd supported them through the hard years. Patricia Chen stood up as Natalie's maid of honor. Marcus was one of Darius's groomsmen. Her parents sat in the front row and cried through the vows. And for once, Natalie didn't question whether the tears were genuine. The reception was held on their newly renovated deck, of course, and as the sun set over Portland, Natalie stood with her husband, surrounded by friends and family and the community they'd built, and felt something like complete peace. "What are you thinking?" Darius asked, his arm around her waist, both of them watching their guests dance and laugh and celebrate. "I'm thinking about broken decks and second chances, about how sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be the best things." "You're getting philosophical on me." "I'm getting grateful." She turned to look at him fully. This man who'd rebuilt more than just her deck, who'd shown her what integrity looked like in action, who'd loved her through battles neither of them had chosen, but both of them had won. "Thank you for being patient with me, for teaching me to see clearly, for building a life with me. Thank you for seeing me, for fighting for us, for proving that love is stronger than prejudice." He kissed her softly, thoroughly, like they had all the time in the world. "Think we can build a business together next?" "What kind of business?" "I've been thinking. Your legal clinic helps small business owners. I train contractors who need mentorship." What if we combined forces? Created a program that provides both legal services and construction training for people trying to build legitimate businesses in the trades. Natalie felt excitement spark in her chest. That's ambitious. So are we. And we've already proved we can build something worthwhile together. He gestured at the deck, the house, the life they'd created. Why stop now? Why stop now? Natalie agreed and felt the future open up in front of them like a promise. They launched the program 6 months later. Foundations and Frameworks, they called it, because every successful business needed both legal structure and skilled craftsmanship. Darius provided hands-on training and mentorship. Natalie handled legal education and business formation. And together they created pathways for people who'd been shut out of traditional opportunities to build sustainable careers in construction. Within the first year, they'd helped 37 people start their own contracting businesses. Within 3 years, that number was over 100. And every single graduate knew that they'd learned from people who believed in integrity over profit, who'd fought for their own relationship, and then extended that fight to everyone who needed someone to believe in them. Marcus became their first success story, launching his own renovation company that specialized in accessible design for elderly and disabled clients. He hired apprentices of his own, teaching them the same standards Darius had taught him. And when he got married, he asked Darius to stand up as his best man. You changed my life, Marcus told Darius the night before the wedding. Gave me a chance when nobody else would. Taught me that doing things right matters more than doing them fast. I wouldn't be here without you. Yes, you would, Darius said firmly. You had the talent and the drive. I just gave you the opportunity to show it. Then give more people that opportunity. Don't stop with foundations and frameworks. Build something bigger. Something that changes the whole industry. They took his advice. Over the next 5 years, Darius and Natalie expanded their program into a full nonprofit organization that provided training, legal services, business development, and microloans to aspiring contractors across Oregon. They hired staff, opened satellite locations, built partnerships with construction companies willing to hire their graduates. And they did it all while maintaining the values that had brought them together: integrity, fairness, dignity, respect. Every person who came through their program learned not just how to build structures, but how to build lives, how to run ethical businesses, treat clients fairly, charge what their work was worth, and refuse to compromise their values for profit. The Portland Business Journal did a feature article on them 5 years after their wedding. The reporter asked the question everyone always asked: how did two people from such different backgrounds create such a successful partnership? Natalie and Darius looked at each other, that wordless communication they'd perfected over years of building a life together. Finally, Natalie said, "We're not from different backgrounds. We're from the same place. We just took different paths to get here. And once we found each other, we realized we wanted the same things: work that matters, relationships built on respect, and a world where everyone gets judged on their competence instead of their appearance." Plus, Darius added with a smile, she had a really dangerous deck that needed rebuilding. I figured I'd stick around to make sure she didn't fall through any other rotted boards. The reporter laughed, but Natalie knew he was serious. That deck had saved her life in more ways than one. It had broken at exactly the right moment, creating a crisis that led her to Darius, which led her to question everything she'd assumed about success and value and what kind of person she wanted to be. 10 years after that first crack in the wood, Natalie stood on yet another deck, this one at their new headquarters for Foundations and Frameworks, a renovated warehouse in Northeast Portland, and watched their latest cohort of graduates receive their business licenses and contractor certifications. 43 people, all different races and backgrounds and stories, all united by the belief that they could build successful careers through honest work. Darius stood beside her, his arm around her waist, both of them watching their students celebrate. He'd gone gray at the temples, and she'd found her first silver hair last month, and neither of them cared. They'd built something that would outlast them, something that mattered. You ever regret it? Darius asked quietly. Everything you gave up to be with me? Your family's approval, your corporate career, the easy path? Not once, Natalie said immediately. Not for a single second. You taught me that the easy path isn't always the right path. That sometimes you have to break things down before you can build them properly. That integrity costs something, but it's worth every penny. I love you, he said simply, for seeing me, for choosing us, for building this life with me. I love you too, for teaching me what actually matters, for being patient while I figured it out, for fixing your deck? She laughed, leaning into him. Yeah, for fixing my deck. Best $15,000 I ever spent. Best deck I ever built. They stayed there as the sun set over Portland, watching their students celebrate and plan and dream about the businesses they'd build, the lives they'd create, the proof they'd provide that success didn't require compromise. And Natalie thought about the journey that had brought her here, from a broken board and a desperate phone call to a life that felt whole and true and exactly right. She'd hired Darius for one afternoon of emergency repairs. He'd rebuilt her deck in 3 weeks, rebuilt her worldview in 6 months, and rebuilt her entire life over a decade of choosing each other, over and over again, every single day. The broken deck hadn't been a disaster. It had been a door, and walking through it had led Natalie to everything she'd been looking for without knowing she was searching. Sometimes the best things in life start with something falling apart. Sometimes you have to trust a stranger with your house before you can trust them with your heart. And sometimes the person who rebuilds your deck is really rebuilding your entire future, one careful, measured, perfectly crafted board at a time. That's what Darius had done for her. Not just built something safe to stand on, but built a foundation strong enough to support a life worth living, a partnership worth fighting for, a love worth every battle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. And standing there on that deck, surrounded by people whose lives they'd helped rebuild, Natalie knew with absolute certainty that she'd make the same choice again, 1,000 times over. Forever. The deck was just the beginning. Everything else, the love, the business, the family they'd created, the change they'd sparked, that was what you built when you refused to accept broken foundations and insisted on doing the work to make things right. That was their legacy. Not just the structures they'd helped build, but the lives they'd helped rebuild. Not just the businesses they'd launched, but the belief they'd proven, that integrity matters, that character counts, and that sometimes the person everyone tells you to doubt is exactly the person who'll teach you to see clearly. Natalie had hired a handyman and found her purpose. She'd fixed a deck and found her future. She'd taken a chance on someone everyone questioned and found the truest thing in her life. And she'd do it again, every single time.